The wooden club in Logan's hand failed to hit Romulus's head. Before he could strike his opponent, Romulus grabbed his other wrist first. Then came a throw, flinging Logan away. As Logan flew backward, the wooden club slipped from his hand and landed at Romulus's feet. Romulus casually picked up the club and walked over to Logan. With a swing of both hands, the club slammed heavily into Logan's temple. "Do you know why I came for you? Because only I can stall you. Without your protection, your great beauty is far too fragile. I hope my subordinates give her a quick end, though it's unlikely. She's just too tempting, isn't she?" Romulus spoke as he swung the club heavily again, knocking back the Logan who was trying to crawl up. Splattering blood accompanied Logan's angry howl, making the onlookers, who were just there for the spectacle, begin to feel afraid. This scene had clearly moved beyond the scope of a bar brawl and was aiming to take a life. Moreover, it was the first time they had encountered such a bloody way of fighting. After all, normally, if people wanted to risk their lives, they would choose to draw guns and shoot each other. A blunt instrument being used to beat someone to death like this was rare. However, as they watched, they noticed something was wrong. A normal person would have died long ago after losing so much blood and being hit in the head so many times. Yet Logan was still alive and kicking, furiously trying to stand up and counterattack. In the end, even after the club in Romulus's hand, as thick as a bowl's rim, snapped, Logan still wasn't dead. But he didn't look much better. His head was already soaked in blood, matting his hair together and even obstructing his vision. He didn't seem to care at all, though, and launched another attack at Romulus. This time, he wasn't taken down by Romulus in a single move. Although his heart was still filled with rage and anxiety, he had calmed down. He knew that if he couldn't quickly defeat Romulus and continued to waste time here, his chances of saving Silver Fox would become infinitesimal. Once Logan calmed down and attacked again, it wasn't so easy for Romulus to find an opening. His powerful beast instincts had already allowed him to narrowly avoid Romulus's attacks several times. Only after calming down did Logan realize that Romulus was indeed a formidable foe. The man was slightly superior in both strength and speed. In terms of fighting techniques, Logan, having undergone Victor's systematic training, was no longer weaker than Romulus. Coupled with his excellent combat instincts, he could continue to hold his own. But what he wanted wasn't to survive a few moves against Romulus, he needed to defeat him and save his beloved girlfriend. From the current situation, however, he likely wouldn't be able to achieve that. While Logan and Romulus were locked in a heated battle, Romulus's subordinates finally made their move on Silver Fox. However, their operation was unsuccessful because someone intercepted them. Just as they kicked open the door to Logan's home and prepared to kidnap Silver Fox, the hand ninjas in red appeared. Along with them came shuriken and katanas. Caught off guard by the sudden attack of the hand ninjas, Romulus's men were thrown into chaos. Strictly speaking, the strength of the two sides was similar. Both were just cannon fodder slightly stronger than ordinary people. Consequently, it was only natural for the hand ninjas, who had gained the initiative, to suppress Romulus's subordinates. Once they had the upper hand, the leading ninja approached the wary Silver Fox. "Are you Lady Silver Fox? The master instructed us to protect you at all costs if you were targeted for assassination, and to temporarily follow your orders. Take me to Logan." After being attacked, the first person Silver Fox thought of was Logan. In fact, she didn't trust either the group that attacked her or these ninjas. The only one she could trust was Logan. Unfortunately, Logan was clearly unreliable at this moment. When Silver Fox arrived at the scene, she saw Logan half kneeling on the ground, with Romulus wantonly humiliating him. "Logan. Silver Fox. Damn it, why are you here? Leave, get out of here now. Take her away, immediately. It seems the trash under my command failed. In that case, I'll do it myself." With that, Romulus ducked low and charged towards Silver Fox's position. To protect their target, the hand ninjas also charged toward Romulus. Facing the shuriken thrown and katanas swung by the hand ninjas, Romulus acted as if they were nothing, letting them strike his body. Blood sprayed through the air. These weapons, lethal to ordinary people, sank deep into Romulus's body. But he didn't fall. Instead, a cold smirk appeared on his face. As he exerted his strength, the katanas gripped tightly by the hand ninjas actually snapped. Furthermore, the blades that were originally embedded in Romulus's body had somehow ended up in his hands. The sharp blades sliced into Romulus's palms, and blood flowed down the gutters. However, it wasn't just Romulus's blood, it included the blood of the hand ninjas as well. The hand ninjas who were attacking Romulus were sent flying back by his strikes. When they hit the ground, blood flowed from their wounds, and their bodies began to turn to ash. "I'll take some men to stall him, the rest of you take the target and go. Lady Silver Fox, for the sake of your safety and Logan's, you must leave this place." After speaking, the leader of this detachment of the hand ninjas charged forward with the remaining ninjas, attempting to block Romulus with their lives. Although they weren't strong, their judgment was quite good. From the way Romulus had just killed their comrades, they had already concluded they were no match for him. But that was no reason for them to shrink back. Since the master had given the order, they had to protect the target at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing their lives. Silver Fox was clearly no fool either. She could see the situation on the field was wrong. Knowing that staying would only make her a burden, she immediately began to leave with the remaining 2 ninjas. However, since the hand ninjas couldn't stop Victor, they naturally couldn't stop Romulus either. The ninjas' life-risking efforts to block him didn't achieve much, but the time they bought was enough for Logan to recover. Bone claws appeared once again between Logan's fingers as the roaring Wolverine charged toward Romulus. This time, Romulus actually began to fall into a disadvantage. Logan's ability to turn defeat into victory every time didn't rely solely on his protagonist aura. His all-out fighting attitude, along with his superb learning ability, keen perception, and near-immortal healing factor, were all his paths to victory. In facing Romulus, his mindset had shifted several times. He had even completely fallen into a disadvantage for a while because he was too worried about Silver Fox. But now that he knew Silver Fox was safe, the situation changed. What he needed to do was no longer to defeat the opponent, but simply to stall him and prevent him from pursuing Silver Fox. So this time, it was Romulus who became somewhat flustered. The intervention of the hand ninjas had nearly ruined his original plan. Moreover, at this point, if he still didn't realize that Victor and the hand had played him together, he wouldn't be fit to be called Romulus. Thus, his resolve to kill Silver Fox became even firmer, even if he had to pay a price. But with Logan blocking him, achieving this was not easy. On the other hand, with the assistance of the 2 ninjas, Silver Fox began to leave quickly. But halfway there, the rancher who was Romulus's subordinate blocked their path with his men. "Aha, isn't this Silver Fox? In such a hurry to run. It looks like I've made another great." Unfortunately, before he could finish, a shuriken landed in his forehead. No one cared about the life or death of an ordinary person like him, neither Romulus's men nor the hand ninjas. So he died because of his lack of strength and the fact that no one blocked for him, killed by a shuriken from a hand ninja. As the rancher was dealt with, the conflict between the hand ninjas and the members of the Wolf Clan fully erupted. 2 ninjas alone naturally couldn't stop the members of the Wolf Clan, but fortunately, reinforcements from the hand arrived just in time. The conflict between the 2 sides finally reached its climax at this moment. The entire town was swept into the clash, turning into a 3-way free-for-all. To the town's residents, both the Wolf Clan and the hand ninjas were invaders of unknown origin. So, led by the sheriff and others, they picked up guns and weapons to fight a battle to defend their homes against both sides. The consistent style of both the Hand and the Wolf Clan was to focus entirely on their mission, completely disregarding the lives of ordinary people. Moreover, since the others dared to attack them, they might as well kill them all. Thus, the 3-way brawl began, and the scene quickly became completely uncontrollable. Even the battlefield where Logan and Romulus fought had people swept into it. Severed limbs and bullets flew through the air, along with fires and explosions everywhere, all declaring that this town, which Logan and Silver Fox once called home, would have to be completely rebuilt. It was precisely this chaos that gave Romulus his chance. The town, completely embroiled in the chaotic battle, meant the hand ninjas could no longer perfectly protect Silver Fox, providing Romulus with an opportunity. Unable to break through, Silver Fox was forced to stay in a corner of the town. Several red-clad hand ninjas stood by her side to protect her. After observing this, Romulus began to gradually shift his battlefield with Logan toward that direction. Logan soon noticed this as well, but though he saw it, he could only worry. Because he hadn't held much of an advantage in this fight to begin with, he could only watch as their battlefield drew closer, step by step, to his beloved Silver Fox. As the 2 of them drew near, the situation here became even more chaotic. While attacking each other, they also had to constantly dodge to avoid being swept into Logan and Romulus's battle. After all, those two were the ones who truly killed without blinking. An unlucky kid who had just been swept in was quickly torn apart, leaving only severed limbs. As the distance closed further, Logan's assault became increasingly frenzied. He stopped dodging Romulus's attacks and instead adopted a style of trading injury for injury. This was exactly what Romulus wanted to see. Only when Logan lost his reason would he have the chance to seize an opening and deliver a killing blow to Silver Fox. He could guarantee that the shock of killing Silver Fox would drive Logan into a murderous rage, naturally involving the entire town's residents. After dodging another of Logan's attacks, Romulus finally found his chance and rushed to Silver Fox's side. When he took her delicate neck into his palm, he showed no mercy. Snap! With a crisp sound, Silver Fox slowly collapsed. The moment she fell, Logan let out a long howl toward the sky and then, with bloodshot eyes, charged at Romulus to kill him. Seeing Logan completely enraged and almost entirely devoid of reason, a smirk of successful scheming appeared on the corner of Romulus's mouth. He began to move around, guiding Logan's constant attacks. Logan, his mind in a state of chaos, was like a wild animal, unable to distinguish friend from foe. He had only one goal in his eyes: to kill Romulus. Under Romulus's guidance, Logan's attacks began to constantly affect innocent townspeople and the hand ninjas. Of course, Romulus's own subordinates were also affected. However, the hand soon chose to retreat due to the mission's failure. Romulus's subordinates had been ordered to leave by Romulus before the hand withdrew. The only ones left were the townspeople who called this place home. At first, they tried not to harm Logan, but they soon discovered that he had no reason left at all. They were forced to launch a counterattack to protect themselves and their families. And their attacks were met with bloody retaliation from Logan. Of course, Logan's primary target was still Romulus, but he couldn't kill him at all. The townspeople were different, they were so fragile before the maddened Logan. Ultimately, when Logan woke up, he saw the town completely reduced to ruins in the raging fire, a scene that could be described as hell. As he remembered what had happened, he charged into the forest amidst his own painful wails. Shortly after Logan left, the hand ninjas returned to the town that had been reduced to ruins. After a careful search, they quickly found Silver Fox's corpse, only to discover that she wasn't dead at all. The target doesn't seem to have died. Then take her back and let the master decide what to do. Understood. And so, the hand ninjas took Silver Fox away. Logan, completely unaware of all this, howled as he charged into the forest, beginning his life as a wanderer. In fact, the reason the hand ninjas came looking for Silver Fox's body was because of Victor's orders. Victor had previously explained that if they thought they had failed, they should find a way to bring Silver Fox's body back and then use the hand's secret techniques to resurrect her. However, they never expected that Victor had actually deduced that Silver Fox would likely not die this time. But because he couldn't say it directly, he had given the aforementioned instructions. As it turned out, things went exactly as he had predicted. Silver Fox survived once again and awakened her X gene, gaining telepathy and extraordinary physical attributes. Of course, that's a story for later. Right now, what Victor needed to do was quickly find Logan to end this oolong incident. However, when Victor arrived at the site of the town, he found that he could no longer track Logan's trail at all. Clearly, while Victor had his own plans, Romulus had his as well. He had done a good job of erasing Logan's tracks and had his subordinates lead Logan to a place far away from Victor. After wandering around for several days, Victor finally left the ruins of the town. The sudden destruction of the town had quickly attracted the attention of the three warring parties. As a result, large-scale armies began to gather nearby. Although Victor wasn't afraid, he didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. Since he couldn't solve the problem with Logan, he could only deal with the person who created the problem. However, when he went to the island to find Romulus to settle the score, he found that the place was already deserted. Even the underground base had been cleared out completely. It seems we've been played by the other side. Forget it, I'll settle the score with him later. The priority now is to find Logan first. After talking to himself for a bit, Victor withdrew from the area with the hand ninjas. Of course, he remained cautious and left a ninja detachment to lie in wait on the island. On Romulus's side, he gave himself a thumbs up for this operation. Experience truly counts, he had successfully fooled Victor and achieved his goal. Little did he know that he would pay an extremely heavy price for this in the future. But for now, he was indeed one step ahead. Because on Victor's side, the search for Logan had yielded no results. So where exactly did Logan go? Actually, he hadn't run very far. He didn't swim across the Pacific Ocean to Japan or anything. Instead, he returned to his homeland, the land of the maple leaf, Canada. Romulus's subordinates followed him closely like shadows, infiltrating and guiding the people and events around Logan. This conspiracy against Logan was finally able to continue. The ultimate goal of Romulus's conspiracy was to strip Logan of his conscience and free will, molding him into a perfect killer. Under the secret guidance of these people, Logan, who had returned to Canada, became a mercenary. At first, he was a freelance mercenary, but life like that wasn't easy. Although he was very strong, he didn't know how to do business. This caused his skills to be wasted for nothing. He often didn't even have money to buy alcohol or pay rent. Fortunately, someone soon took notice of his great skills. A company called Landau, Luckman and Lake was willing to hire him as a long-term contractor. Logan didn't refuse, or rather, he didn't care who he worked for. After losing Silver Fox, Logan had been in a passive state of just drifting along. This situation continued until he was hired by Landau, Luckman and Lake and then met an old acquaintance, Saraf. Of course, in this timeline, they didn't know each other. However, one thing remained the same, Saraf's target was still Logan. But this time, she wasn't there to take his life, but to develop a relationship with him. Naturally, it goes without saying that the person who hired Saraf was Romulus. When Saraf took the money and accepted the mission, she never thought that she would actually fall in love with Logan because of it. While Logan was starting his new life, Silver Fox, who had been brought back by the Hand Ninjas, also woke up in the Hand's base. Although she hadn't lost her life, that severe injury had caused her to lose something, her memories of living with Logan. Or rather, she couldn't remember who she was at all. The emergence of such a situation gave Victor a bit of a headache to deal with. It looks like the brain damage caused by oxygen deprivation hasn't fully repaired itself. But since she could come back to life after nearly dying, I suppose recovering her memory should be possible too. Although he couldn't be sure if Silver Fox could recover her memory, as long as Logan could remember her, it would be fine. A man as excellent as Wolverine, aside from a very few women, who could resist his charm. When the time comes, let her spend some time with Logan again, and their feelings will develop. But before that, Silver Fox's strength must be improved, otherwise, if she gets captured again, it will be a big problem. She's simply too weak. Even though she awakened her superpowers and her physical fitness has been enhanced, unfortunately, she knows nothing about fighting. Forget it, you train her, Nobu. As you command, Master. As for her code name, let's still call her Silver Fox. As for her rank, just assign her to the Red Ninjas. Instead of giving her to this kid, why not give her to us? That's right, that's right. This little girl is so pitiful, it's better to let us train her. Originally, Victor intended to let Nobu train Silver Fox, but the jokers from the Chaste, no, the elders, intervened and asked for her. Victor didn't feel any resentment toward this situation. Instead, he was happy to see it happen. Deep down, he didn't want to train Silver Fox into a killing machine that only knew how to slaughter. If she were given to these jokers from the Chaste for training, while they would still subject her to rigorous ninja training, they would also teach her things like conviction and justice. In fact, for now, the way the Chaste and the Hand were getting along was quite interesting. After truly joining the Hand, the people of the Chaste realized that the Hand could never go back to the way it was. The contract had turned all the ninjas of the Hand into puppets with self-awareness. They were neither living nor dead. Their so-called self-awareness was nothing more than an illusion under the constraints of the contract. In other words, the good or evil of the contract holder determined the good or evil of the entire organization of the Hand. As for breaking this contract and letting the Hand vanish completely, did they really think Victor was a fool? Although he wasn't some demon or bad person, he wasn't the kind of great hero who sacrificed himself for others either. Besides, if he were a great hero, then the Hand would become an organization that upheld justice, wouldn't it? The Chaste naturally knew that Victor would not break this contract, so they stayed by Victor's side by way of returning to the Hand, observing every move he and the Hand made. Victor, knowing what they were thinking, directly gave them back the status and authority they should have had before the Hand split, letting them guide the hand's actions. However, to distinguish them from other members of the hand, this part of the hand ninjas belonging to them all wore white ninja outfits. Victor was also very helpless regarding the eccentric style of the chaste. Ninjas wear black to better hide themselves. You're wearing white, unless there's no light source at all at night, you'll be as conspicuous as can be. But those old guys from the chaste didn't care about that. They wore white themselves, so they made the ninjas directly under them wear white clothes as well. And Silver Fox was naturally no exception, but her outfit seemed slightly different from the other ninjas. At the very least, Victor's eyes twitched when he saw it. Isn't this just a white-clothed version of Elektra? Yikes, look at that exposed leg. Oh well, forget it, one shouldn't covet a friend's wife, see no evil, see no evil. Victor stared like that for a while, and after Silver Fox started to feel a bit uncomfortable, he muttered, "See no evil," and turned around and walked away. That guy's eyes were practically glued to her, ha 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 ha. I think his nose was about to start bleeding. Hey, is it really okay for you guys to be like this? Where's your integrity? Little did he know that his actions were all seen by the people of the chaste who were hiding and observing him from the shadows. However, they just mocked him and didn't plan to do anything more, like, for example, telling that little sorceress girl about this. Speaking of which, that little sorceress girl hadn't seemed to come here for a while after she left last time. Just as they thought, Nina hadn't appeared for some time since she left. This period of time was so long that even Victor was starting to worry. After all, he and she had rarely been apart for this long. He didn't think much of it when they were together, but now that they were suddenly apart, he felt a bit unaccustomed to it. At this time, Nina was undergoing rigorous training from Sorcerer Ancient One. Because of Victor, Nina's original training courses and other arrangements had all become a mess. Therefore, Sorcerer Ancient One had grounded her. If she didn't meet her requirements, then Nina couldn't go to see Victor anymore. As for Victor's side, Sorcerer Ancient One had sent a sorcerer from the sanctum to deliver the message. Thus, Victor actually knew about Nina's current situation, but he still couldn't help but miss her. After thinking it over, he decided to find something for himself to do. After all, besides Nina's matter, the Ancient One had specifically reminded him of another thing, the matter of Sabretooth Victor's fate. In fact, Victor knew that this was the Ancient One expressing dissatisfaction with his recent actions. Although the final result still headed in that direction, Victor's role in it was completely different. However, Victor felt that he had done nothing wrong. He was never someone who let fate toy with him. Since fate wanted to toy with him, it had better be prepared to be toyed with by him. While Victor was planning his next move, Romulus had also completed his great victorious escape. From a deserted small island in the middle of the Pacific, he went all the way across North America, over the Atlantic Ocean, and arrived in Madrid, Spain. Here, his other old partner, Mr. Sinister, received him warmly and was very interested in the plan he proposed to clone a member of the Wolf clan. In fact, Mr. Sinister had long been eyeing the genes for the self-healing ability of the Wolf clan. Unfortunately, the self-healing ability of most Wolf clan members didn't reach the level he wanted. And the only one who could reach that level was Romulus's genes, but Romulus naturally wouldn't provide his genes to this dangerous fellow. He had even gone for a long time without personally taking action to avoid leaking his own genes, instead always hiring the hand ninjas or sending his own subordinates. It wasn't until this time, with the appearance of Logan and Victor, that a large number of variables finally forced him to personally step in to deal with the mess. As it turned out, the mess wasn't cleaned up, and he even lost one of his home bases. He even had to come and ask for help from this dangerous fellow, Mr. Sinister. However, there was one thing Romulus had to admit: although Mr. Sinister was born much later than him, his talent was limitless. He had actually deduced the existence of mutants on his own through research and had even turned himself into an extremely powerful mutant through modification. Of course, Romulus suspected that this so-called modification was just a front Mr. Sinister put up for the outside world. What exactly happened was probably something only Mr. Sinister himself knew. Even with Romulus's intelligence capabilities, the last thing he found was merely that Mr. Sinister had once disappeared for a period of time while on an expedition to Egypt, and after he came back, he had become like this. Although Romulus suspected that it was that disappearance that created the current Mr. Sinister, he later sent people to dig 3 feet into the ground at the locations Mr. Sinister had visited when he disappeared in Egypt, but he still didn't find anything useful and finally had to choose to give up. Welcome, Emperor Romulus, my dear friend. This time, where is the blood source you've provided me? What is its owner's name? I'm very curious, can you tell me? Victor. Victor Creed. As for a nickname, let's just call him Sabretooth. It must be said that Mr. Sinister is a genius who transcends his era. Moreover, he transcends not just one era, but at least two or more. At a time when Darwin's theory of evolution was still considered shocking and scandalous, he had already foreseen the era of mutants. This led to his tragedy, but of course, it also led to his success. Now having fulfilled his wishes, Mr. Sinister has not only become the mutant he dreamed of being, but has also acquired extremely powerful strength and technology far beyond the era. And what he is most proud of is his cloning technology. It is both his trump card and his life-saving hole card. What Romulus needs is precisely his cloning technology. This was also a poisonous scheme thought up by Romulus. It could continue the training of Logan while also driving a wedge between him and Victor. Making them suspicious and hostile toward each other could be said to kill two birds with one stone. As for why he didn't clone Logan, it was because Romulus felt the time wasn't right yet. Furthermore, he didn't want to hand over the blood of both Logan and Victor to the other party all at once. Wouldn't it be better to wait until he found a way to get the cloning technology himself? Moreover, he had no way to guarantee that a cloned Logan could deal with Victor. If the clone were captured alive by the opponent, the entire plan would be exposed. Mr. Sinister had long coveted genes that possessed long lifespans and powerful recovery abilities, so he agreed to Romulus's terms without hesitation, to help Romulus create a clone of Victor who would obey him completely. While Romulus and Mr. Sinister were busy creating their person, Logan's side had begun to get very close to Seraph. However, his feelings for Seraph ultimately could not compare to those he had for Silver Fox. Logan has had many women in his life. One could say he is a wanderer. But although he is affectionate, he is never promiscuous. He is a man of many feelings and deep devotion, and he has paid a heavy price for it. Whether it was his first love, Rose, or the later Silver Fox, both caused great trauma to his soul. Now with Seraph's company, he finally began to move out of the trauma brought by Silver Fox. However, once he recovered, Logan became the sensitive and intelligent Wolverine, rather than the drunkard Howlett. Thus, he soon noticed that something was wrong with Seraph and the colleagues around them. They likely all belonged to a mysterious force. For Logan, this was nothing if not ironic, even leading him to start deceiving himself. He pretended not to know these things and continued to dally with Seraph every day, but he found that he couldn't seem to find that previous feeling anymore. On the contrary, Seraph began to discover that she seemed to have truly fallen in love with Logan. This was something she had never encountered before while on a mission. As a mercenary who killed without blinking for money, she had confidence in herself. It wasn't until she met Logan that her confidence began to waver. She used to look down on those men, but the feeling Logan gave her was completely different. Logan's body was strong and wild, yet his character contained a gentleness. Most importantly, Logan possessed a unique charm that held a fatal attraction for a woman like her. Although Seraph kept telling herself it was just a mission, the final result was that she inevitably sank into it. She hadn't even noticed that she had already been exposed. She was completely immersed in her feelings for Logan. Now, rather than saying she took the mission to seduce Logan, it was more like Logan had seduced her. Just as Seraph was finally convinced by Logan in bed, Silver Fox also finished her personal training career. It must be said, the foundation of a mutant is truly excellent. Under the tutelage of the Chaste's ninjas, her strength had already far exceeded that of an ordinary the Hand Jonin, catching up to the later Daredevil Matt. Then she was sent out to find Logan's whereabouts. Although she no longer remembered who Logan was, deep in her heart, there was still an impulse urging her to find this person, and not just because of the mission. Shortly after Silver Fox set out, Victor's side suddenly received a message from the Sanctum Sanctorum, telling him to go visit Nina. Having received the letter, Victor was stunned for several minutes before he reacted. Sorcerer Ancient One did seem to say that Nina isn't allowed to come see me, but she didn't say I'm not allowed to go see her. But if she doesn't let me in, I won't be able to find where the Sanctum Sanctorum is at all, so what's the difference? Despite saying so, his actions were very honest as he began packing his things, preparing for the trip to the London Sanctum. Though he didn't know why Nina's training location would be at the London Sanctum. It wasn't until he arrived that he learned Nina's training location was not at the London Sanctum. this was merely a transit station. In fact, the place he was going was not even on this planet anymore. Victor didn't know which planet in the universe he had stepped onto. Everywhere he looked was a wasteland. And Nina was currently on this wasteland, dealing with a demon from hell. Compared to her previous combat style which focused on telekinesis, Nina had actually started using close combat. She used magic to condense invisible mystic holy swords, continuously launching attacks at the demon. However, Victor soon discovered that she wasn't just using mystic holy swords to attack the demon. Her telekinesis was also simultaneously interfering with and attacking the demon. Under the double blow, the demon soon became overwhelmed and was knocked to the ground. Subsequently, Nina used a spell to banish the demon, which had lost its ability to resist, from this plane. Very beautiful magic technique. It seems you've grown stronger again. Only I have made no progress at all. Regarding Victor's praise, Nina was a little happy, but she also sensed a bit of Victor's disappointment. After all, he had once possessed extremely powerful strength, and now returning to his former state of having nothing was indeed somewhat difficult to accept. As for the reality stone, this fellow had been silent for a long time. If he couldn't still feel its presence, Victor would have thought it had completely shattered and disappeared. Of course, Victor had discovered another use for the reality stone. By stimulating its power, he could temporarily transform into a scaled-down version of a cursed warrior. The reason it was called a scaled-down version of a cursed warrior was, on one hand, because the enhancement wasn't that large, and on the other hand, because this change was reversible. It's just that the wear and tear on the body was not small. Even with the healing factor as support, the time Victor could stay as a cursed warrior currently could not exceed 3 minutes. Otherwise, it would cause permanent irreversible effects. Of course, he could also use the reality stone's ability to eliminate these irreversible effects, but doing so would make the reality stone's condition turn for the worse again. My training here has also come to a close for now, so let's leave this place. I don't like the environment here much, it's too desolate. Saying so, Nina used magic to teleport Victor and herself back from that planet. Of course, the actual situation wasn't that her magic was sufficient to support interstellar travel, but rather because beneath that area, there was a massive magic circle that could teleport the mages above back to the sanctum. All Nina had to do was activate that circle. Because I successfully banished that demon, teacher said I no longer need to receive her guidance and can study on my own from now on. So I've decided to give myself a few years of vacation. You should accompany me during this time. A few years of vacation, is that really okay? Victor initially thought the vacation Nina mentioned would be at most a few weeks or months. He didn't expect it would actually use years as the unit of time. It's no problem, I agreed to this matter as well. However, I hope you can hide your identities and go experience this world properly as ordinary people. In fact, thinking carefully, the three present were all long-lived species in a sense. So a few years, which seemed long to ordinary people, really didn't count as very long for them. Moreover, the Sorcerer Supreme also hoped that through these few years of ordinary life, Nina could experience more of the ordinary world rather than becoming a high and mighty mage. This was also because of Nina's background. She wasn't like ordinary mage apprentices who were born into ordinary human families. She wasn't even considered human, which could easily cause some issues. Ancient One worried that in the future, as Nina became even more powerful, she might develop some dangerous extreme thoughts. So she hoped her disciple could leave the environment of the Sanctum Sanctorum to experience the mortal world. As for calling Victor along, it was simply hoping he could look after her somewhat naive disciple. Of course, this naivete was just Ancient One's own view. As a Nina with telepathy, the only two people whose thoughts she couldn't see through now were Victor and Ancient One. The more she became accustomed to the human heart, the more Nina actually disliked these people. Especially when she could freely control others' thoughts. The mages of the sanctum appeared modest and polite to her on the surface, but in reality, their hearts were full of wariness and fear toward her, which she had long seen clearly. She even once began to think that Ancient One was the same as these mages. It wasn't until later, when Ancient One opened her mind and let her feel that the other party was indeed full of kindness toward her, that she truly accepted Ancient One. In fact, Ancient One was the only person besides Victor who truly made Nina acknowledge and admire her through her own actions and heart. As for Victor, it was because Nina could never see through him, combined with being raised by him, that this was achieved. After receiving Ancient One's instructions, Victor and Nina decided to begin a global tour lasting several years to properly see the Earth's atmosphere of this era. As for the hand side, it was all handed over to that group of jokers from the Chaste. This group had long coveted the leadership of the hand, and now they could finally have their wish fulfilled. Although he was once a bit worried that the hand would turn into a circus upon his return, considering the existence and effect of the contract, Victor still felt at ease entrusting the hand to these elders of the Chaste. Just leave it to us. Rest assured when we handle things. Play a bit longer, it's best if you don't come back. Shut up. What he means is, you should accompany Miss Nina more, we'll be fine here. Just like that, amidst the farewell ceremony of the Chaste and the hand ninjas, Victor set off on his journey with Nina. And in a position in the sky where they couldn't see, Ancient One was also watching the two who were departing. Why do I feel like everyone wants us to leave? Do you feel that way too? Although he sensed that something wasn't quite right, Victor still chose in his heart to continue the trip. The reason was simple, wasn't the legal lowly by his side great? As for a stinky man like Logan, he actually wouldn't die even if ignored. Thus, they headed to the first stop of this journey, Kyoto, Japan. At this time in Japan, the capital had not yet moved to Tokyo. Kyoto was still its political and cultural center, and it had another name, which was the famous Heian-kyo. Of course, Victor and the others didn't encounter any situation like the night parade of 100 demons. But Japan, which had only recently opened its borders, still preserved a large amount of traditional snacks and scenes. So Victor took Nina here to stroll the streets like ordinary people, buying small toys and souvenirs. Of course, they also didn't miss out on gorging themselves at the roadside snack stalls. In fact, Nina didn't eat much, she didn't necessarily need to consume these foods. On the contrary, Victor truly proved what it meant to be a big eater. He created a legend. In the following days, he ate his way through all the snack shops on the entire street and became the most popular guest among the shop owners, not picky about meat or vegetables, foolishly rich, and possessing a massive appetite. He also became one of the few outsiders in this era who would be welcomed by the locals of this land. However, after trying all the snacks, Victor and Nina left the area. They didn't expect that shortly after they left, Logan would arrive here. He had accepted a mission from the company to come to Kyoto, Japan, to solve some trouble the company was facing here. And in reality, this mission was actually a trap and a test aimed at him. His mission target, on the surface, was a perpetrator of a serial murder case attacking young girls. But in essence, it was the first-generation sabretooth Victor Creed clone, rushed out by Mr. Sinister and Romulus. Because it was a rushed product, its quality was somewhat concerning. But Romulus still impatiently brought it to Japan, wanting to test just how much of the original Victor's ability such a clone could have. As for the clone that was completely based on Victor himself as a blueprint, it was still in Mr. Sinister's incubation tank and had not yet fully grown up. Although Logan didn't consider himself a good person, deep down, he was still a hero. So when he learned of the existence of such a maiden killer, he resolved to cruelly eliminate the culprit. As for Romulus and Mr. Sinister, since they had decided to put on a show, they naturally had to go all out. If they said it was a maiden killer, then it definitely had to be a maiden killer. They instilled relevant criminal memories into this clone, and the clone's physical qualities also gave him the capital to become a true and undeniable maiden killer criminal. Since everything was ready, how could they skip the most crucial step? It was a very ordinary day, and Tomi was walking home. As the most beautiful girl in her class, Tomi naturally had a delicate face and a well-endowed chest. In summary, she had a pure face and a seductive figure, easily inspiring endless fantasies. And she was very adept at using these advantages to get what she wanted. Of course, because of this, other envious female classmates would secretly badmouth her behind her back. But she never cared, because she had something they could only dream of. Unfortunately, she never imagined that her proud beauty would bring her a fatal disaster. As she passed through the alley as usual, a hand reached out from the darkness. As a lucky person of the new era, she was quite fortunate to have the opportunity to go to school. Because in the past, women were not allowed to attend school in Japan. But she was also unlucky, because on her way home from school, she encountered the maiden killer, created by Romulus. I didn't expect this guy to have such good taste, he chose a great beauty as his first target. After seeing the clone's chosen target, Romulus exclaimed. Mr. Sinister, on the other hand, disdained it, having moved beyond such low-level interests. He believed that so-called love and desire were merely the results of hormone secretion in the brain. What a boring topic. But your little wolf is almost here. I'm already impatient for the upcoming data collection. But unfortunately, he still couldn't escape these low-level interests, because he still had desires and cravings. Just like now, he was very much looking forward to what would happen next. Of course, what he was looking forward to was not what the clone would do to Tommy, but the combat data between Logan and the clone. So, how was poor Tommy feeling now? When she was first grabbed, she was indeed startled. She was very afraid that the other party would harm her, but the other party's subsequent actions slightly reassured her. Because the other party didn't seem to be after money or life, but rather after her body. This was something she was good at. As long as she wasn't harmed, it was fine. Then the clone was a bit confused, because he didn't understand why the person he was holding hostage was even more proactive than him. Romulus and Mr. Sinister, witnessing this scene, exchanged glances and began to click their tongues in wonder. Interesting. I'm tempted to spare her life and study her brain thoroughly. Humph, she's just trying to survive. But without power, it's ultimately futile. Tommy endured the impact and pain the clone inflicted upon her, trying to cooperate with his actions, hoping he wouldn't kill her. Unfortunately, the clone's hand still reached for her fragile neck. With a gentle squeeze of the clone's large hand, Tommy fell with a look of despair in her eyes, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. You damn bastard. What have you done? I'm going to kill you, and you'll pay for this, I swear. Logan, who had just arrived, witnessed this scene and confirmed the target's identity as a mad, maiden killer. Bone claws extended from between his fingers, and his throat began to emit a low growl, a prelude to Logan's attack. At this moment, the clone seemed to just notice Logan and turned around. Victor. No, you're not him, he wouldn't do something like this. Who are you? The clone obviously had no obligation to answer him. After a bloodthirsty sneer, he directly attacked Logan. Logan met him without hesitation, and the two collided instantly. Then Logan discovered that the opponent was actually slightly stronger than him. This made him begin to doubt if the opponent really wasn't Victor. Because in previous fights, Victor's strength was also slightly superior to his. Coupled with the characteristic canine teeth and sharp claws, Logan couldn't help but start to waver in his thoughts. Being distracted in battle is a major taboo, and even Wolverine was no exception. Thus, he was grabbed by the wrist by the clone, slammed hard onto the ground, and then thrown back. Logan, falling from the air, hit the ground hard, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Alright, whoever you are, you've pissed me off. Are you ready to face my wrath, you bastard? Logan said, spitting out the bloody foam from his mouth, then quickly got up to meet the clone's next round of attack. This time, he noticed the difference between the opponent and Victor. Although the opponent's strength was not weaker than Victor's, their movements were far less agile than Victor's. Therefore, he, who was not inferior to Victor in agility, was not without a way to deal with the opponent. In fact, he should be able to easily toy with the opponent. And what happened next did not deviate from Logan's expectations. The overly clumsy clone couldn't even touch Logan. He was like a bear being teased, constantly lunging at empty air, then suffering attacks from behind. Moreover, the wounds on his body didn't heal quickly. At least, far less efficiently than Victor and Logan. You're bleeding so much, it looks like you're done for, big dummy. Logan continued to attack mercilessly while mocking and provoking the opponent. He repeatedly attacked the opponent's wounds, preventing them from healing. He wanted this damned bastard to bleed out his last drop of blood. In fact, he succeeded in doing so, because the clone began to feel his body growing heavy. And his originally keen senses also began to blur. He was dying. Although he didn't know what death was, he instinctively sensed it and began to feel fear. The rage that had filled his heart vanished without a trace. Now, an unspeakable fear occupied his mind. So he made the most wrong decision, to abandon the fight and turn to flee. Turning his back to Logan was the clone's biggest and last mistake. Logan directly leaped onto his back, then plunged his claws from both sides of the clone's neck. The gushing blood splattered Logan's face, but there wasn't much more to come. Because in the previous battle, the clone had bled too much, he had no more blood to shed. The clone wailed, making a final struggle, trying to shake Logan off and save his fading life. Unfortunately, his efforts were destined to be futile. Wolverine's killing intent was unwavering. Moreover, his injuries were already completely irreversible. Phew, is he finally dead? What a troublesome guy. I'll have to make those guys pay more when I get back. After confirming the clone's death, Logan sat down on the ground, beginning to ponder the hidden secrets behind it. He felt that things weren't that simple, but unfortunately, he wasn't good at such matters. He was good at straightforward combat, not guessing riddles with opponents. However, he had his own way of dealing with such situations, meeting force with force. No matter what conspiracies lay behind it, they would eventually be revealed. And he just had to kill his way through until that day came. Logan, who had intended to rest a little longer, was forced to hastily leave the scene due to the sudden arrival of the police. In fact, these police were controlled by Romulus's subordinates. In other words, these people were brought by Romulus to clean up the mess. After all, many things needed to be recovered, such as the clone's body. But in the end, Mr. Sinister actually took Tommy's body, saying he had a very interesting idea. This made Romulus glance sideways, and also created a terrifying urban legend in the island nation in the future. After evacuating the scene, Logan did not stay long in Japan, but directly left the island nation and returned to his base in Canada. The happiest person about Logan's return was none other than Saraf. She had been very lonely during Logan's absence. Has anything changed here since I've been gone? After thoroughly satisfying Saraf, Logan tentatively asked. Saraf, who had completely let down her guard around Logan, naturally told Logan all the changes in the base without holding anything back. Unfortunately, Logan couldn't find anything suspicious in it. After all, he wasn't some famous detective or wise man who could analyze a bunch of things from detailed information. Since he couldn't analyze anything, Logan just had to continue cultivating. And Saraf was naturally happy about this. After all, a short separation makes the heart grow fonder. While Logan and Silver Fox were being intimate, Silver Fox finally gathered some information about someone who might be Logan. This led her to leave the federal lands, crossing the border into Canada. Of course, during this time, she encountered quite a bit of trouble. The reason was her skin color and race. She was a pure-blood Native American. The Native American Alliance had just lost the war. Their leader, the guardian of the Native Americans, Red Wolf, had been ambushed by the Northern Federation at a peace talk council, due to his trusting their peace deception. Although Red Wolf was brave, he was not invulnerable, nor did he possess the powerful self-healing ability of Victor. Even strong individuals like Victor and Logan had been captured alive and brainwashed by the federal military using human wave tactics, let alone Red Wolf. After killing dozens of soldiers, Red Wolf was ultimately ambushed from behind and fell on the land he had sworn to protect. The Confederate States of America was furious about the Native American Alliance's private rapprochement with the Northern Federation, so after Crazy Horse's death, when the Northern Federation attacked the Native American Alliance, they did not choose to assist the Native American Alliance. Ultimately, the leaderless Native American Alliance was thus defeated piecemeal by the Northern Federation's army. The once glorious Native American Council nation vanished into thin air. After resolving the Native American Alliance issue, Federal President Lincoln quickly issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all black slaves in the Confederate States of America would gain emancipation and the status of free people. It was not until this moment that the rulers of the Confederate States of America realized their regret was too late. With their ruling foundation shaken, the Confederate States of America was no longer able to intercept the vast federal army of the Northern Federation. Although it was delayed for a long time, the Federation finally completed its unification. And due to years of war, its military technology developed even more powerfully. After integrating internal contradictions, the Federation began to actively seek external expansion and interests. But at the same time, it did not neglect internal purges and rectifications. All plantation owners lost their slaves, and they had to start maintaining their plantations by employing workers. This greatly increased their costs, and many plantation owners went bankrupt. The freed slaves and bankrupt plantation owners provided a large amount of human resources for the northern industries and factories. For the slaves, it was essentially just a change in identity, still being slaves. For the bankrupt plantation owners, this was an immense torment and humiliation. Many bankrupt plantation owners were forced to work alongside their former slaves in factories. The extent of their dodgy blow/impact can be imagined. This also led many plantation owners to commit suicide rather than work in northern factories. And sporadic resistance continued to emerge endlessly. Those initiating the resistance, besides these plantation owners, also included countless Native Americans who had lost their homes. Although the vast majority of Native Americans were relocated to the very barren reservations designated for them by the federal government, there were always some who chose to stay and decided to resist until the last moment. The bankrupt southern plantation owners soon joined forces with the Native American resistors, because once again, they had a common enemy. They began to destroy the Northern Federation's railway lines and factories, assassinating the officials they sent. The Northern Federation was plagued by these resistance organizations, and thus ordered the resolute elimination of these damned resistors. So when Silver Fox, carrying weapons, appeared on this land, as a Native American, she was naturally regarded as a member of the resistance organization and was pursued by the federal government army. And the abilities she subsequently displayed made the decision to pursue her even more firm. Because from her extraordinary agility, the federal government saw the possibility of a second Red Wolf emerging. It looks like there are still many areas that need improvement. Mr. Sinister lamented as he dissected the corpse of the clone. Although they had anticipated the clone's failure, they hadn't expected it to lose so simply and thoroughly. It could be said that it was completely crushed by Logan. While Romulus was very satisfied with Logan's performance, Mr. Sinister was quite dissatisfied with his own creation. Fortunately, such works can be continuously improved. Moreover, the newly acquired Tomy was also a very good material. Thus, Mr. Sinister began his modification work once again. His tasks were actually quite complex. While he needed to calibrate the clone, he also had to instill memories into it. He had a great idea and was prepared to put it into practice. Having mastered the ability to instill memories into clones, he decided to give this clone some memories, for instance, that he was the real, sabretooth Victor, and that the one outside was merely an imposter. However, Mr. Sinister did not realize that because of his actions, he had just happened to fill in the missing piece of history. Once the calibration of the clone began, the direction of events veered toward a path he could not control. First, the clone's physical attributes began to surge, eventually reaching the standard of the original almost perfectly, and even exceeding it in some ways. Then came the memory input, where some minor issues seemed to arise, but when he went to check, he found no problems at all. At least from the instrument's feedback, everything appeared normal. Therefore, Mr. Sinister happily opened the incubation tank, preparing to welcome the arrival of his perfect creation. Essex, what's with that expression? Why is the look in your eyes making me feel as disgusted as if you're looking at one of those damn test subjects of yours? Oh, it's nothing, I'm just checking on your recovery. As for my gaze, you must understand, I am a scientist, it's just an occupational habit. You have to be understanding of a poor man like me. Judging by the clone's behavior, there were no issues with his memories or performance, everything seemed perfect. Now, it was time to show Romulus this surprise. Hi Mr. Romulus, come and see our dear, sabretooth, Mr. Victor. Thanks to my efforts, his condition has become quite perfect. Victor. Yes, Romulus, you seem surprised to see me. Our cooperation should still be valid. Speaking of which, Logan's birthday is coming up, I need to go find him some surprises. After all, I arrive on time every year, so naturally, I can't be late this year. With that, Clone Victor turned and left on his own. Romulus turned his gaze toward Mr. Sinister, wanting to know exactly what was going on. The sense of threat he felt from Clone Victor was not the least bit inferior to the real Victor, and perhaps even greater. Moreover, the way the other had just behaved was very strange. I think you owe me an explanation, Nathaniel Essex. Clearly, Romulus was truly a bit angry. It seemed Mr. Sinister had done something he completely could not understand. Therefore, he needed the other to provide a reasonable explanation. Don't be angry, I can tell you everything, provided you have enough patience to listen. You wanted to create conflict between Victor and Logan, but a clone is just a clone after all. There is no way to replace the original, at least in terms of memory. Unless you have a way to obtain the original's complete memories, which we clearly cannot do for now. So you fabricated a set of memories. Fabricated memories? No, I created a persona. a persona of Sabretooth Victor cultivated and grown according to your plan. In fact, the nickname, Sabretooth, did not actually exist in this universe yet. It was merely a title Romulus intended to bestow upon Victor. However, because Victor ran away from home and because of the subsequent series of events, the title had never appeared until the clone was created. After leaving Mr. Sinister space, clone Victor soon left Europe and took a ship to the American continent. In the memories he had received, his current identity was that of a mercenary. Therefore, it wasn't strange for him to head to the federal government, which had just ended its civil war. The federal government was hiring a large number of mercenaries to handle things they deemed unsuitable for the federal army. In their words, it was called getting someone else's hands dirty in exchange for their own country's cleanliness and peace. And what the clone prepared to do was exactly the kind of work that would get his hands dirty. Or rather, he didn't care about getting his hands dirty at all. Even when the female government employee who hired him told him she hoped he wouldn't have too much of a moral burden, Victor's reply was, "Moral burden? No, such a thing simply doesn't exist for me. Don't worry, I have no morals at all. What I love doing most are exactly the things you mentioned." After hearing clone Victor's words, a cold sweat broke out on the female employee's back. She finally realized that the large man before her was a truly dangerous individual. Compared to him, those other mercenaries were just a bunch of little kids. And when Victor and the others actually began conducting black ops for the federal government, this was proven true. This one named Victor has a truly outstanding resume. No faith, no principles, he lives only for money. No matter what the mission objective is, he never refuses and leaves no survivors. Interesting. During missions, the clone had no qualms about slaughtering innocents. He often killed for the sake of killing. Sometimes, he even killed the rescue targets. There was one typical rescue mission where the target was the female employee who had once recruited clone Victor, Janice Hollenbeck. In Victor's words, he had simply, accidentally, passed through her body while evacuating his bullets. Of course, he also frequently evacuated other things into Janice's body. Victor's words quickly drew the ire of those above him. However, no one could suppress him, and the matter eventually just faded away. But after that, Victor never received those tedious rescue and evacuation missions again. Every mission he was sent on was related to slaughter, and he always completed them perfectly, sometimes even exceeding the mission requirements. It was precisely because of his brutal performance and his unique self-designation that the name, Sabretooth, Victor began to gradually spread within the North American mercenary circles. While clone Victor was making a name for himself in the US, Logan was also doing quite well in Canada. Besides Saraf, he had found another female confidant. Of course, this confidant was also the in-bed kind. Her name was Ophelia Sarkisyan. Interestingly, Saraf wasn't jealous at all. Perhaps this was Logan's unique charm. Even in such a situation, his harem didn't catch fire. If it were anyone else, they'd likely have been thrown into another dimension by now. While Logan was winning over beauties, he also gained both fame and fortune. He defeated a serpent-like worm, Unskala, that attempted to invade the local area, becoming a common hero to the Native Americans and the immigrants alike. The local Native Americans chief bestowed upon him the unique title of Wolverine Warrior. Coincidentally, this word and his name, Wolverine, actually mean the same thing in English. Having become a hero, Logan enjoyed celebrity-like treatment in the local area. Especially when his birthday arrived, everyone came out of their homes to attend the grand banquet he hosted. But what they didn't know was that a man calling himself Sabretooth Victor was about to bring Logan an annual birthday surprise. For this, he had likewise been preparing for a long time. Clone Victor used the money he had earned to hire all of his colleagues to attend Logan's birthday banquet. They prepared enough weapons and explosives for a high-intensity encounter. And these mercenaries were already battle-hardened and mentally unstable fellows. So, when Logan's birthday banquet reached its climax, all the attendees and the banquet itself flew into the sky. That's right, they were all blown away, including one of Logan's little lovers, Saraf. Her lower body was blown off, and she died in Logan's arms, spitting blood. Then, the mercenaries invited by Clone Victor began to follow Clone Victor's orders, continuing to warmly entertain the survivors. Holding pistols, Molotov cocktails, and explosives, they frantically slaughtered the survivors fleeing in all directions. As for the protagonist of the banquet, Logan was left for Clone Victor to deal with himself. After all, Clone Victor's purpose was to accompany Logan through his birthday and have a good play with him. Wow, isn't this Logan? Are you surprised? Big brother Victor has come to celebrate your birthday. Now, let's have some fun. Victor, why do this? I just want you to recognize your true nature. Believe me, even if I didn't do this, you would do it yourself one day. Logan, dizzy with rage from the blow, had clearly lost his ability to think and his reason. He immediately unsheathed his bone claws and launched an attack at Clone Victor. Then he was sent flying by a single punch from the other. Whether in skill or strength, he was completely crushed. Even Romulus had never given Logan such a feeling. This feeling was like encountering a fated enemy and nemesis. Logan simply could not calm down. He launched frantic attacks, his sole purpose being to tear the other apart. But the result every time was being struck hard by the other, yet he would never give up. Meanwhile, Ophelia Sarkisian stood by, witnessing it all. No matter how many times Logan attacked, he could not defeat Clone Victor. In the end, he was completely knocked to the ground, and then Clone Victor walked over to his side. It seems you're still not being good at all, so I've decided to give you a little lesson first. With that, Victor crushed the bone claws protruding from between Logan's fingers with a stomp. Logan let out a loud roar of pain and completely lost consciousness. After Logan fainted, Victor turned his gaze toward Ophelia Sarkisian. But after looking at her for a while, he just smiled and walked away. As for why he didn't harm the woman, it was because Victor sensed a viper-like aura from her. That aura made him feel a hint of eeriness and danger, and unwilling to cause further complications, he abandoned the idea of attacking. After all, his main goal had already been achieved, hadn't it? To make Logan realize that he was a goddamn jinx. Whenever he found happiness, he would bring destruction and disaster to those around him. Interestingly, not long after Clone Victor left, Logan woke up. Then Ophelia Sarkisian told him that she had saved him and hoped he would become her husband. It must be said that this woman's power of seduction was indeed very strong. One wondered who was more powerful between her and Black Widow. She knew very well how to use her perfect appearance and figure to achieve her goals, as Logan actually agreed to her proposal. After attending Logan's birthday banquet, Victor returned to federal territory with the mercenaries. Shortly after his return, the higher-ups assigned him a brand new mission, to hunt down a Native American's woman. According to intelligence provided by the federal military, this Native American's woman possessed physical attributes far beyond those of ordinary people and could also manipulate human words and deeds and read human memories. Ordinary federal soldiers were simply no match for her. However, she seemed to have no intention of hurting people until she discovered the federal military dealing with some Native Americans' resistance fighters. After several failed attempts to capture her, they decided to send out their ace, Sabretooth Victor. They hoped this notorious mercenary, who had a 100% mission completion rate, could take care of her. And Victor indeed did not disappoint them. Shortly after receiving the mission, he traced Silver Fox's trail through a small piece of white cloth provided by the federal military. By this time, Silver Fox had already left federal territory and arrived on Canadian soil. And the direction she was heading was exactly where Logan was currently living with Ophelia Sarkisian. But even more interestingly, behind her was Clone Victor, who had left not long ago and was now pursuing her trail. Achoo! I don't know why, but I have an ominous premonition that I'm about to take the fall for something. You're overthinking it. Where are we going next? My hometown, Florida. In the end, Victor and Nina never made it to Kunlun. Victor's identity was simply too sensitive. So they returned to London instead, and the reason for choosing London was purely one of Victor's whims. He even spent a fortune to buy number 7 Savile Row, Burlington Gardens, registering the purchase under the name Phileas Fogg. Victor was genuinely surprised the house actually existed and was still vacant, perhaps because a famous orator named Sheridan had once died there. After all, homes with a history of death are never popular. The London Council was delighted that someone was willing to pay top dollar for the property. The house looks lovely, but I'm sure you have another motive, Nina said. Why can't it be that I'm simply investing in real estate so I can spend the rest of my life with you? I'm serious. When everything is over, let's settle down right here. Though Nina sensed Victor was still hiding something, she couldn't help picturing the future he described. Victor thus sidestepped any further questions and also dropped the idea of hiring an efficient French servant. They wouldn't be staying permanently for now, but that didn't stop them from meeting the neighbors and soaking up the flavor of Victorian London. Nina had spent years inside London's sanctum, yet she'd never really experienced the city beyond its walls. At the time, London was hailed as the capital of the civilized world, though it was better known by another name, the infamous Fog City. Beneath the title of First City of Kindness and the greasy fog lay a vast gulf between rich and poor and slums housing millions. Victor hadn't come to do charity, so he had no intention of touring those districts. Still, he donated generously to local charities and deposited a large sum in the bank. Money proved, as always, the best calling card. The bank manager quickly ushered him into London's high society and made him a celebrated gentleman. "I never imagined you could become an English gentleman. They're only interested in my money." "So you're saying money lets you do whatever you want?" Victor was tempted to answer yes, but instinct warned him the topic was dangerous and he let it drop. "Rather than debate that, let's talk about dinner tonight." The house on Savile Row was hardly palatial, but it was comfortable, and the fully developed 19th century transport made coming and going easy. Every day Victor and Nina would stroll down the straight road to one of the city's famous restaurants. They never ate at home, they saw no need. They were here to experience London. How could they do that without sampling the cuisine? Yet each outing ended in disappointment. Apparently only the British Empire itself could appreciate its own cooking. To Victor it wasn't as awful as future internet reviews claimed, it merely looked unappetizing, and his adaptability saw him through. For Nina, human food had no flavor, everything tasted the same because, essentially, she was a vampire. Besides, food wasn't her priority. From the day Victor bought the house she had inspected every corner. She was extremely particular about where she lived. As everyone knows, vampires prefer grand castles, so their standards are high. Victor's house might not be luxurious, but it was neat, clean, dignified, simple, and very comfortable and convenient. It even had a private study, which delighted her. It was the perfect cozy nest for a homebody like Nina, though for now it still ran on coal gas and would need updating once technology improved. Thinking this, Nina began planning her future life with Victor here, even drawing up a daily checklist. Victor, of course, had no idea Nina had already planned their children. He was busy deciding where to go next, since they'd sampled most of London's charms. He finally settled on Paris. The city had left him powerful memories in this era, and there were people he wanted to see again. With the destination set, the next journey could begin at any moment. Before leaving, Victor hired a housekeeping company to look after the London property. That housekeeping firm was, naturally, a front for the hand, so the daily cleaners and caretakers were actually hand ninjas. At first Victor had considered Greece, but the country was in turmoil and hardly suitable for tourism. So Paris it was, while the hand, its center now in Greece, had spread across Europe, allowing them to set up a front even in insular London. The hand's rapid expansion owed much to its shift in nature. Under the Chaste and Victor's pressure, many of its old illegal ventures had become untenable. So they branched into housekeeping, arms, real estate, anything that used their abundant manpower, able to work tirelessly without food or rest. Hydra watched this transformation with surprise, but also satisfaction, one less potential rival. Besides, the hand still cooperated, selling arms and intelligence. Though laundering itself, it never abandoned assassination and espionage. Even the Chaste understood that, to keep the world clean and peaceful, someone must be willing to dirty their hands. Of course, none of this had anything to do with Victor for the moment. He only needed to enjoy the benefits the hand provided him. As for the duty of leading them, the people of the Chaste had voluntarily taken it upon themselves. Just as Victor bought his ticket and boarded the ship bound for Paris, Silver Fox, now inside Canada, finally picked up Logan's trail from the scattered clues she had found. But when she crept near Logan's house and spied on him through a telescope from the window, the sight that met her eyes made her blood boil. Although it was still broad daylight, Logan was in bed with Ophelia Sarkisian, doing things better left undescribed. The moment Silver Fox saw it, the string in her mind snapped. Fragments of memory seemed to return. In them, Logan had been doing the exact same thing, only the woman beneath him wasn't the one in the bed now, but herself. Though her memories hadn't fully returned, it was more than enough to ignite nameless fury. She drew the split-water eme daggers from her waist and burst into the room. Fortunately, Logan's nerves were sturdy. Faced with the sudden assassination attempt, he didn't panic into impotence, as more than one adulterer caught by his wife had done. With Silver Fox storming in, what he'd been doing naturally came to an abrupt halt. Seeing the sharp weapon thrust straight at him, he instinctively scooped up Ophelia Sarkisian and rolled off the bed. The sight of Logan still protecting Ophelia Sarkisian made Silver Fox's eyes instantly red. She would kill that slut. Everything about Ophelia Sarkisian screamed a woman of the night, no decent female at all. She must have seduced and bewitched Logan. Silver Fox swore to kill her and jolt Logan awake. Strictly speaking, Silver Fox wasn't wrong, but at this moment Logan didn't know he'd been enchanted. He only felt his head splitting in two. The woman he thought dead had reappeared and was clashing with his current wife. Both were the loves of his life, and he couldn't bear to see either harmed. Logan now understood what a battlefield of jealousy meant, though he'd never heard the term. Compared with Silver Fox's direct ferocity, the woman known as Madame Viper was far wilier. In an instant she grasped the situation. This scantily clad, hot-blooded Indian woman was clearly an old flame of Logan's. She didn't know why they had parted, but it gave her perfect material to drive a wedge between them. To her eyes, Silver Fox was child's play. "Logan, who is she? Why is she here? Didn't you say you'd love only me from now on? Boo-hoo." As she spoke, tears streamed down. Watching his weeping wife, Logan felt torn, but harming Silver Fox was utterly unthinkable. Silver Fox could see his hesitation. While secretly glad he wouldn't hurt her, she loathed Madame Viper even more. "Logan, get out of my way, let me kill that slut." Logan couldn't agree to that either. Still under the enchantment, he considered Madame Viper his beloved wife, and his nature wouldn't let him stand idle. Against the aggressive Silver Fox, Madame Viper wouldn't sit still. Using her looks to the full, she dodged pitifully while weeping prettily, all the while calling to Logan for help. Logan wouldn't watch his wife be hurt, especially when Ophelia Sarkisian kept losing ground, chased and battered by Silver Fox. "Stop, listen to me. Silver Fox." At last Logan intervened, only to stop Silver Fox from harming Madame Viper. But to Silver Fox, it looked very different. Logan was clearly bewitched. She would have to knock him out first, then kill the bitch. Without hesitation she turned on him. Switching targets, she never considered whether she could beat Logan. In truth, the idea of dropping him was wishful thinking. Though Logan held back to avoid hurting her, how could Silver Fox bring herself to truly hurt him? At first Madame Viper smiled to see them fight. But her smile didn't last. She quickly realized from their moves that neither wanted to injure the other. "No, Logan is mine alone, no one will take him." Thinking this, Madame Viper devised a new scheme. Pretending to help Logan, she re-entered the fray. Of course, the dagger she carried was laced with deadly poison. Anyone cut by it would die without her antidote. Actually, she didn't want the woman to die by her hand, that would make Logan hate her. She preferred to stage an accident instead. Logan knew the dagger was poisoned, so he blocked Madame Viper to keep her from using it on Silver Fox. But that left his back open. Silver Fox kicked him flying. As Madame Viper moved to strike, a slow clap sounded nearby. "Bravo, what a show, Logan." Clone Victor, tailing Silver Fox all the way, had arrived at Logan's home, and what a spectacle he'd stumbled upon. After all, Madame Viper and Logan had been in the middle of something when they were attacked. They hadn't had time to dress. So Victor saw every splendid curve of Madame Viper, and she felt the possessive hunger in his gaze. "Victor," they both exclaimed. "Interesting. Romulus told me he'd already killed you, yet here you are. Looks like I'll have to finish what he couldn't." "I won't let you do it, Victor." With that, the two men threw themselves at each other, leaving Madame Viper and Silver Fox standing awkwardly to the side, trading wide-eyed stares. For a moment the women felt they might be the superfluous ones, those two brawling men the perfect match. The thought flashed through their minds and vanished. The next instant they lunged for each other. Petite Silver Fox was faster. Her daggers darted for Madame Viper's shoulder. Viper didn't flinch, twisting her own blade to meet the attack. If Silver Fox kept the thrust, she'd gash Viper's arm, but the ninja's instinct screamed death from the oncoming dagger. She broke off, springing back beyond Viper's reach. Only then did she notice the eerie sheen coating the dagger. "Poison on the blade, typical, you cheap bitch. So you noticed. Afraid now, little girl." While taunting, Viper's hands never stilled. She plucked several poison darts from her clothes and flung them. Silver Fox, ever wary and a dart master herself, answered in kind, whipping shuriken back. Where Silver Fox stayed unruffled, Viper's dodges looked clumsy. Her weapon of choice wasn't the dagger but a poison-laced whip. Caught off guard, she'd had no time to fetch it. Snagging a poisoned dagger from her coat had been quick thinking. Silver Fox saw the opening. Viper's parries were sloppy against ranged attacks. She kiked, using her speed to stay clear and pepper Viper with shuriken. Heaven knew how many blades Silver Fox hid in that skimpy outfit. Viper was soon seething, sliced and stung. Once silken skin now bore a lattice of nicks. Blood-matted hair clung in a rat's nest. The delicate face streaked with crimson looked pitiful. Realizing her peril, Viper cried for help from Logan. She cared nothing for his safety, her own life was all that mattered. And if he were pinned down, the girl across from her would never let him die. "Help me, Logan, watch out." As expected, the scream made Logan hesitate and glance over. Silver Fox, startled by the warning, looked too. Already on the back foot, Logan's moment of distraction gave Clone Victor the perfect chance. Victor drove a boot into Logan's back, sending him flying. Silver Fox abandoned her assault and sprinted to the fallen Logan. Clone Sabretooth stalked after. "Step aside, little girl, this is between him and me. I won't let you hurt him." She attacked anyway, the gap in strength was brutal. Clone Victor caught her wrist, bearing a feral grin. Logan hadn't fought all out, now Victor knew how to change that. "I warned you, Logan, she'll pay." "No, take me instead." "Sorry, Logan, no deal." He seized her other arm and forced her own dagger into her stomach. "No, I'll kill you, Victor." Logan launched himself, tackling Clone Victor to the ground. Victor only laughed, delighted. "That's more like it, Logan, let's play." Claws flashed, both sets of bone blades sank into flesh, blood spraying. The wounds were grievous but far from fatal. In the grapple that followed, Logan was hurled off like a weed torn from soil. Before he could rise, Victor pinned him. Logan fought back with everything, refusing to yield. Win or lose, he would give all, die with his fangs in the enemy's throat if he must. Victor answered Logan's fury with even greater savagery. In this clone, the beast and the madness lived perfectly intact. Especially after his memories were tampered with, filled with abuse and patricide, he'd gone completely insane. So when Logan also sank into madness, he was actually delighted. He could sense how alike they were, yet the other kept pretending to be soft. That infuriated Clone Victor. He wanted Logan to release his true nature and become his companion. Clearly he was almost there, but not quite, because Logan had collapsed again. So he decided to provoke him further. Wasn't there a woman here, supposedly his wife or something? "All right, Logan, you lie there and watch. The next act will be even better." With that, Clone Victor dropped the prone Logan and walked toward Madame Viper, who sat to one side. Obviously she had her own plans, which was why she hadn't fled in the chaos. Watching Clone Victor approach and seeing Logan beaten to the ground, she instantly felt confident. She stood and moved toward him of her own accord. Reading the greed and lust in his eyes, Madame Viper knew this one would be far easier to control than Logan. She'd been doing unspeakable things with Logan anyway, switching partners was no problem. To the sound of the clone's heavy breathing, the two continued right in front of Logan, the business Logan had left unfinished. What hurt and enraged him most was that Madame Viper actively cooperated, looking ecstatic. Under Clone Victor's contemptuous stare, Logan's eyes nearly burst with blood. The stimulus sent his healing factor surging, wounds that had covered his body closed almost instantly. "Victor, today you die here." "All right, darling, let me play with him first, then we'll continue, okay?" Still hitching up his trousers, the clone charged shirtless at Logan. They fought again, and this time Logan was noticeably stronger. Logan was like a spring of limitless resilience. The harder you compressed him, the harder he rebounded. Yet he would never snap or flatten, because he was Wolverine. Roaring, Logan attacked. Even Clone Victor, who had just overpowered him, began to find the onslaught taxing. "Just stay down." In the end Clone Victor knocked him out cold. Done, he returned to Madame Viper and slipped an arm around her slender waist. By now she had donned a garment that barely counted as clothes, making her intention clear. She wanted Clone Victor to take her with him. "Let's go, darling. We'll come back for her next year on Logan's birthday. Such a beauty, I can't wait. Ha ha ha." Thus the clone abandoned Logan and Silver Fox, strolling off with Madame Viper. Not long after, the body they'd thought dead, Silver Fox, twitched. Logan. Logan? Where are you? When she fully came to, clutching her wound, she saw Logan lying nearby, his bone claws still extended. But those claws had snapped into several pieces scattered on the ground. The cuts on his face and body, however, had healed. He simply hadn't regained consciousness. After bandaging herself, Silver Fox dragged him back to the house he once lived in. While she nursed him, Victor and Nina arrived in Paris, before the city had its famous Iron Tower. Yet tales of Mr. Hyde already circulated, though their impact was eclipsed by recent upheavals. Seems we've arrived at an inopportune time. Versailles troops combed the streets, hunting Parisians. The recent unrest had ruined the city as a tourist spot. That very chaos was why Mr. Hyde chose it, easy to hide, and the army's manhunt masked his crimes. With daily deaths so high, a few more of his victims went unnoticed, until he picked Nina as a target. Sensing the turmoil, Victor and Nina had already planned to leave. They were neither locals nor saviors. Powerless to help, they decided to move on to a calmer, more pleasant city. Versailles checkpoints delayed them, but Victor's title as English gentleman proved useful. It at least proved he wasn't part of the uprising. Though Anglo-French relations were poor, the soldiers dared not harass a noble. Yet as they neared the station with their luggage, Mr. Hyde struck, his main target, the seemingly little girl Nina. He harbored vicious delight toward anything that evoked protective instincts, loving to shatter purity. It was more than pleasure, pain and thrill mixed with the urge to protect and destroy. He was addicted. This time he kicked an iron plate. He'd barely leapt out before he found himself suspended mid-air, utterly immobile. Well, Mr. Hyde, second time you've fallen into my hands. I'm the one who caught him, dear Victor. As long as you're happy, darling. So, what shall we do with him, my baby? It was obviously impossible to just let Mr. Hyde go. First, not to mention that he might still harm others. Even if he didn't, he would definitely retaliate against Victor and Nina. After all, Mr. Hyde also had a violent temper and would never swallow his pride and let it go. So Victor had few remaining choices: either solve it once and for all, or make the other party completely submit. Given that he had already killed Mr. Hyde once, Victor didn't plan to solve this problem once and for all this time, and he also lacked a French servant, even though Hyde was actually a Londoner. Let Edward come out and talk to me. This big brute isn't a good person to communicate with. When Nina restrained Mr. Hyde, Victor had already made up his mind. He wanted to talk directly to the other side of him. So he immediately had Nina call out Mr. Hyde's other side, the English gentleman Edward. Ugh, damn it, what did you do? I don't want to go back. You look quite disheveled, Dr. Edward. Who are you? How did I get here? Damn it, what did Hyde do? Even after reverting to Edward's appearance, he still retained the memories of Mr. Hyde's actions. This brought his inner guilt and despair to a peak. As a gentleman with noble morals and a kind heart, he never imagined that his potion would lead to such disastrous consequences. It's no wonder that in the original work, Edward eventually chose to end his own life in agony. He was just chased all the way from London to Paris. Of course, he might have accidentally killed a few people along the way or something. Damn it, he didn't just kill a few people, but many. Damn it, I shouldn't have developed that drug. My original intention was to eliminate the evil in human hearts, but I never expected to create a monster. What's the use of saying all this now? Hyde's appearance is a foregone conclusion. The solution is to quickly find a way to make amends. Yes, I must make up for this mistake. How did you do it, changing me back to my current state? Since I drank that potion, I shouldn't have been able to recover until the effects wore off. In fact, the Edward before him was no longer the purely good man, because the crimes Mr. Hyde committed in London were due to Edward's repeated inability to resist drinking the drug. And because of Mr. Hyde's criminal acts, he eventually attracted the monster killer, Van Helsing. Then Mr. Hyde discovered that everything he once prided himself on was so vulnerable in front of Van Helsing. Whether it was speed or strength, Van Helsing was no weaker than him, and his movements were swift, far exceeding his imagination. His attacks couldn't even touch the opponent. Fortunately, he had a cunning brain completely contrary to his massive physique. After realizing his chances of winning were low, he decisively chose to flee. And after chasing for a distance, Van Helsing was eventually shaken off by Mr. Hyde, who used his familiarity with the terrain. After getting rid of Van Helsing, Hyde immediately reverted to Edward's appearance. Edward, who shared Hyde's memories, naturally knew that London was no longer a place he could stay, so he decisively chose to leave and head to another major European city, Paris. However, before he could enjoy a few days of freedom amidst the chaos in Paris, he ran into Victor and Nina, becoming their captive. The method to restore you, well, that's a bit complicated to explain. But as long as you stay by our side, you won't have to worry about transforming. That much is certain. Alright, then what price do I have to pay? In fact, Edward also realized that the other party probably wouldn't let him leave easily, so he decisively chose to follow his heart, as this was the only way he could have survived until now. And the request Victor made, in Edward's opinion, although somewhat embarrassing, was not unacceptable. Victor said he needed a French servant and hoped Edward would take that position. Edward actually wanted to say that he was a proper Londoner. And deep in his mind, Mr. Hyde was roaring curses at Victor, saying his whole family was French. What they didn't know was that the ancestors of the Clyde family were indeed immigrants from France. So Victor actually spoke French and English, he just rarely spoke it and hadn't told anyone. Well then, please guide me from now on, master. Don't worry, since you've become our servant, we'll definitely help you. Don't you agree, Nina? Thank you, master. Where should we go next? Since he was already a servant, he should act like one. Edward naturally took Victor and Nina's luggage, carried it on his back, and then began to inquire about his master's next move. We're going to Brindisi, to experience the ancient Roman style. Italy. Alright, master. The newly unified kingdom of Italy was on its path to revival. Therefore, Brindisi at this time was actually very prosperous. And as a tourist attraction, it was also very suitable. There were many medieval churches and ancient Roman ruins, and it was also one of Italy's wine-producing regions. When Victor and Nina truly arrived here, the facts proved that Victor's judgment was correct. The beautiful seaside scenery and unique Italian charm made Victor and Nina truly experience what romance was. They visited various ancient sites, shopped, tasted delicious food and wine, enjoying leisure and nature. All the chores were left to Edward. As a former English gentleman, Edward actually had great taste and demands for his own life. So now, he was serving Victor and Nina according to his former taste and demands. Even so, he was often disliked by the two as a third wheel. And he also found that although Victor claimed to be an English gentleman, Edward felt he was more like a descendant of an immigrant from the US. Of course, he would only keep these words to himself and never say them aloud. However, Edward was quite satisfied with another point. Hyde seemed to be appearing less and less. If it were before, once he stopped taking the medicine for a while, he would see Hyde's reflection in any reflective surface he could find. And that figure would constantly incite him to drink the potion again, transform into Hyde, and commit crimes everywhere. But ever since he became Victor's servant and stayed by his side, Hyde had never appeared again. What he didn't know was that this was actually Nina's doing. She used a method similar to Professor X Charles's approach to Phoenix Gene, sealing Edward's Hyde personality. However, this seal was not complete, it was loose, allowing his Hyde personality to gradually merge with his Edward personality again. In addition, she also imposed another influence on Edward's two personalities, which would gradually affect their cognition, ultimately making them completely identify with the role of Victor's servant and become truly loyal servants of the Clyde family. At this time, Edward was still reveling in the absence of Hyde's troubles. In his words, this was bittersweet. Being a servant was hard, but physical hardship was nothing compared to mental torment. Of course, as for which outcome was better, becoming a loyal servant of the Clyde family or committing suicide due to mental torment, even Edward himself couldn't say. Moreover, he probably wouldn't live that long, because when Victor and his group left Paris, Van Helsing was already on his way to Paris. In other words, if it weren't for encountering Victor and his group, Mr. Hyde might already be a corpse. Although the church's order to Van Helsing was to bring Mr. Hyde back, every time, Van Helsing brought back a corpse. Because in Van Helsing's view, the possibility of these dangerous individuals causing trouble far outweighed their usefulness. So every time, he would uncontrollably, accidentally, kill them. And he also knew that as the church's ace, the church wouldn't do anything to him for this. Therefore, he acted even more brazenly when doing these things. Facts proved that the church indeed couldn't do anything to them. Instead, they could only continue to rely on him to clear out dark creatures and supernatural threats in various places. Of course, there weren't too many powerful troubles in this era that needed Van Helsing to deal with, except for his destined arch-nemesis, the vampire progenitor Dracula. He was supposed to deal with the problem of the vampire progenitor Dracula after going to Paris and resolving Mr. Hyde. However, due to the intrusion of Victor and Nina, things changed a little. And Van Helsing, as a seasoned monster hunter, naturally wouldn't give up halfway. So he followed Edward's footsteps all the way from Paris to Italy. But as soon as he arrived in Brindisi, Victor and Nina had already ended their journey there. They boarded a ship from the port and set off directly for their next destination. After experiencing the unique Mediterranean charm, Victor decided to visit Africa. And the best choice for Africa was naturally to visit Egypt. Moreover, he went to Egypt not just for tourism, but also to investigate the intentions of a certain blue-skinned individual. Although it wasn't time for him to emerge yet, what if? So, Victor and Nina boarded a cruise ship bound for Suez. And Edward naturally followed his master onto the ship. The unfortunate Van Helsing thus missed his target, but he did not give up. Because he had recognized the servant beside Victor as the target he was pursuing. "Give me a ticket to Suez too, one that departs immediately." "All right, father. Have a pleasant journey." So he quickly used the church's influence in Italy to find out the destination of the ship Victor was on. Then he bought a ticket for the next ship and headed to Suez for the pursuit. As the most outstanding and powerful monster hunter in the church's history, Van Helsing's abilities naturally far surpassed ordinary people. Although he arrived in Suez a day later than Victor and his group, he still managed to find out where Victor and his group were staying. And that night, he rushed into Edward's room to apprehend him. Almost the instant he saw Van Helsing, Edward was terrified. But he still chose not to drink the potion, instead turning to flee and shouting for help. Facts proved his choice was very correct. Just as the saw in Van Helsing's hand was about to split him open, someone reached out and grabbed Van Helsing's arm. "What are you trying to do to my servant, Logan? No, with this attire, are you Van Helsing? And who are you?" Although Van Helsing was curious how this well-dressed gentleman knew his identity, his actions didn't stop. His other hand, not being held, still swung the chainsaw towards Edward. "That won't do, Mr. Van Helsing. I can't let you harm my servant, at least not now." "So you know that your servant is actually a shape-shifting serial killer." "Coincidentally, I've heard a little about Edward's situation. But strictly speaking, he's just a pitiful person. He has already reformed, so why are you persecuting him so relentlessly?" After the negotiation failed, Van Helsing decisively chose to shut up and tried to break free from his hands. He was better at solving problems with his hands than with his mouth. But he quickly discovered that the tall gentleman in front of him was not so simple either. At the very least, an ordinary person would never be able to hold his wrist still, even with his full struggle. Van Helsing felt Victor's hands were like iron shackles, not moving an inch even when he exerted all his strength. So Van Helsing decided to try a different way to break free from Victor's grip. He raised his right foot and kicked towards Victor's ribs. If that kick landed, Van Helsing was confident that the other party would no longer be able to hold his arm. But how could Victor let him have his way so easily? The moment Van Helsing lifted his foot, Victor grabbed Van Helsing's arms and, taking advantage of his unstable stance with only one foot on the ground, threw him directly out. Although Van Helsing successfully broke free from Victor's restraint, he was also thrown quite hard. Fortunately, Victor had no intention of pressing his advantage, but rather looked at him with a half-smile. "It seems we can't communicate without a good fight. Then let's go, Mr. Van Helsing." "Silver Fox, what exactly happened? I thought you were dead. How did you end up here?" "I don't remember much. It seems like the ninjas from the hand saved me. To be honest, I'm still not clear on my relationship with you, or who that bitch is." Let me explain. This whole thing is a bit complicated." Evidently, though his physical injuries had healed, Logan's crisis was far from over. Moreover, the crisis before him seemed far more terrifying than any clone Victor. While Logan was busy managing his public relations crisis, the battle between Victor and Van Helsing had reached a fever pitch. Or rather, it had reached its climax the moment they started fighting. Victor's fighting style had been forged through countless slaughters and battles. Van Helsing's combat techniques were no exception, though Van Helsing more frequently faced various types of magical creatures. Thus, in terms of sheer versatility, Van Helsing might have had the upper hand. But when it came to the simple art of killing people, Victor was more proficient. However, once the two began to fight, they were unexpectedly evenly matched. While Victor and Van Helsing were locked in a stalemate, Edward decisively chose to run out and find help. But just as he got up and walked near the door, he saw Nina entering. He immediately felt relieved. Knowing how powerful she was, Edward decisively turned back, pulled out a stool, and invited his mistress to sit. After pouring her a cup of tea, he stood behind Nina. The fight between Victor and Van Helsing didn't affect the young girl drinking tea in the slightest. This was partly because they deliberately avoided her, and partly because the room was large enough. Of course, the primary factor was that neither of them was using lethal force, they were merely sparring. This was evident from the fact that Van Helsing wasn't wielding a chainsaw and Victor hadn't bared his claws. The two were merely testing each other. Van Helsing was confirming whether Victor truly had the strength to suppress Mr. Hyde, while Victor was testing the strength of this universe's Van Helsing to gauge the power of Count Dracula. From the current situation, the conclusion Victor drew from Van Helsing was that Count Dracula should be quite strong. Victor noticed that since the fight began, Van Helsing's strength had been steadily increasing. Unwilling to be outdone, Victor also stepped up, and the exchange between the two became increasingly intense. If their initial exchange had been a restrained probe, they were now testing the upper limits of each other's strength. Victor then discovered that the other's upper limit seemed to be just a tiny bit higher than his own. As for exactly how much higher, Victor couldn't tell without a fight to the death. Nina, on the other hand, saw at a glance that Victor was actually no match for Van Helsing. She could feel a very powerful holy force within his body. This power lay hidden within Van Helsing's body. Even before being fully activated, it endowed him with physical attributes and combat instincts far beyond those of ordinary people. Without using the power of the reality stone within his body, Victor was slightly weaker than the current Van Helsing. Of course, if the reality stone in Victor's body were fully restored and he could use it freely, then even if Van Helsing awakened the holy power in his body, he would be no match for Victor. After all, the Infinity Stones themselves were synonymous with power. However, there was little point in continuing the battle before her. Nina decided to separate them, which for her was merely a matter of a single thought. Telekinesis was such a convenient ability that Victor often felt envious and jealous of it. It looks like we can't keep fighting. How about we save it for next time? What is this power? If you can guarantee that Edward won't commit any more crimes, I can give him a chance. You can rest easy regarding that. If he dares to kill the innocent again, I won't let him off either. As they spoke, both of them looked toward Edward, who was standing behind Nina. Edward, who had been standing stiffly with an expressionless face, was instantly covered in cold sweat. Fortunately, Victor and Van Helsing didn't keep their eyes on him for long, turning instead to Nina, who was drinking tea. At the gaze of the two men, Nina merely looked up at them once, and they reflexively turned their heads back. How about it, shall we go out for a drink together? No problem. And so, the two guys who had just been fighting tooth and nail were now heading off to drink with their arms around each other's shoulders. Nina also set down her cup and vanished directly from her seat. Edward was left alone in the room again. He, who had been standing straight, instantly collapsed. It had to be said that in some respects, the gap between Edward and Hyde was quite large. At the very least, Hyde would never show such a state at any time. Although Mr. Hyde could also be cowardly, on the surface, he always appeared very heroic and fearless. However, the trouble did not end with the conclusion of the fight. The vampires under Count Dracula finally arrived in Suez. Of course, the target of these vampires was neither Edward nor Van Helsing, but the vampire, Midnight. Or we could call her, Nina Price. As a traitor to the vampires and a werewolf hybrid, Nina had always been a thorn in the side of Dracula and the entire vampire race. Her existence represented a brand new possibility, freedom. Before Nina Price appeared, no vampire had ever been able to escape Dracula's absolute control over them. But the appearance of Nina Price proved that it was possible. Her will was free and not controlled by Dracula. Dracula had thought about making trouble for her before, but unfortunately, Nina had always been under the protection of the Sorcerer Ancient One. Although Dracula would not die, it didn't mean he was an idiot. Essentially, he was not without weaknesses. At the very least, he couldn't stay too far from his coffin, and he could die, he just happened to be able to be resurrected. If he went to cause trouble for the Ancient One, the chance of being slapped to death wasn't high, but being sealed was a certainty, which would lead to more trouble. As for why he knew this so clearly, it was because he had once been young and reckless too. In the past, Count Dracula, relying on his ability to resurrect infinitely, had offended and provoked many big shots. Most of them were thoroughly disgusted by him. However, a few individuals left a very deep impression on him, turning him into the veteran shut-in vampire progenitor he was today. After getting his head bashed in by the Sorcerer Supreme and only managing to escape by committing suicide to respawn, Dracula never bothered the Sanctum Sanctorum again. Even later, when Nina was adopted by the Sorcerer Ancient One, he restrained himself from seeking trouble. He knew that Nina couldn't stay in the Sanctum Sanctorum forever, she would eventually come out. After all, he had endless life to wait for that day to arrive. And if all else failed, he could outlive the Sorcerer Ancient One. Although the Ancient One was extremely powerful, she was not immortal. As it turned out, Dracula's guess was correct. The Ancient One indeed couldn't keep Nina locked in the Sanctum Sanctorum forever. After all, she was her disciple, not a prisoner. And later, the Ancient One did indeed kick the bucket, proving Dracula right on both counts. However, by the time the Sorcerer Ancient One died, Dracula had long since fallen into a long cycle of resurrection because of Van Helsing. As this was the opportunity Dracula had been waiting for, he naturally wouldn't miss it. When he learned that Nina had left the Sanctum Sanctorum, he immediately sent his capable subordinates to track her whereabouts. Ultimately, the vampires successfully caught up with Victor and the others in Suez and witnessed the battle between Victor and Van Helsing. As a world-renowned demon hunter, many of the vampires' companions had died at Van Helsing's hands. Therefore, when they discovered Van Helsing, their first reaction was to hide quickly. In fact, that's exactly what they did, and from their hiding place, they witnessed the entire battle between Victor and Van Helsing. Only after the two left did they dare to emerge from their hiding place. In their eyes, those two guys were simply too terrifying, not like humans at all. Because of this, they waited until Victor and the other men entered a bar and didn't come out for a long time before they began their move against Nina. Little did they know, the two they thought were terrifying were mere small fry. The truly terrifying existence was the target of their mission, the midnight vampire, Nina Price. This was something they only discovered after they went inside. It was as if she had known they were coming and was sitting by the table waiting for them. The moment they stepped into the room, Nina's previously lowered head snapped up. Along with her head, a silver dinner knife that had been on the table also rose. The vampires didn't see Nina make any movement, yet the dinner knife simply floated in midair. Then it began to spin, aiming at one of their members. "Damn it, get out of the way." The lead vampire only had enough time to shout the warning before a silver dinner knife was already embedded in his companion's head. Of course, the killing didn't stop there, it continued. When the dinner knife was pulled from the vampire's head, the vampire frozen in place instantly turned to ash. They were neither living nor dead, so when they died completely, their bodies would vanish in a puff of smoke, as if they had never existed. Vampires also never looked in mirrors, because they were a void in the reflection. But Nina was different, she looked in the mirror every day because she was as beautiful as a flower every day. Of course, this was also related to her special constitution. It could be said that she could enjoy all the abilities of a vampire without having to pay any price. How could this not make the vampires feel jealous and resentful toward her? Furthermore, she possessed something that none of the other vampires had, freedom. So when Dracula said he was sending vampires to kill her, many powerful vampires wanted to take the mission. But in the end, only they had come. They had thought this would be a simple slaughter and perhaps yield some unexpected gains. After all, from the intelligence they had received, the target was merely a magic apprentice. But when the fight actually began, the vampires discovered that this was no magic apprentice. This was practically a scaled-down version of the Ancient One. The opponent hadn't even moved a hand, and their subordinates were already dead or wounded. The vampire leader didn't live much longer than his subordinates. Although he relied on his swift movements to dodge the silver dinner knives flying at him several times and even tried to launch a counterattack against Nina, it was all in vain. The moment his body left the ground, he became completely unable to move. He then watched helplessly as the silver dinner knife flew out from the wall it was stuck in and charged toward his forehead. Just as the knife was about to enter his forehead, it suddenly stopped. But just as he thought he was going to be spared, the knife moved again. He watched as the lethal silver dinner knife slowly pierced his skin, then penetrated his skull, and finally stabbed into his brain. During this process, he could feel the burning pain at the wound and the feeling of death gradually descending. In fact, before Nina completely killed this vampire, he had already utterly broken down. By the time Victor and Van Helsing returned from their drinks, Edward had already come in to tidy the room and thoroughly clean up. So when Victor pushed the door open and entered, Nina was still at the desk reading her magic book, as if nothing had happened. Victor went straight to the washroom to start washing up. Van Helsing has moved in next door to us. I've made an appointment with him. If he receives a mission to go to Romania, we'll go with him. I remember Dracula seems to have a bit of a thing for you. What he wants is my life, not a vampire bride he can't control. Oh please, over all these years, how many brides has he gone through? He's just an emotionless walking corpse, a withered bone in a tomb at his core. So are you going to stay tonight and let me be your bride? Cough, I just remembered I have some things to do, so I won't disturb your reading. Bye-bye. With that, Victor opened the door and fled in a panic. After a small giggle, Nina showed a bit of loneliness. They both clearly knew each other's feelings, but that bastard just couldn't make a move. She wondered if he was really incapable. Unfortunately, Victor couldn't hear her thoughts, otherwise he would surely tell her, I'm very capable. But I really can't bring myself to lay a hand on a lowly. The sense of guilt is too strong. The instant one of his subordinates died, Count Dracula felt it. In a rage he hurled away the wineglass in his hand. Of course, the crimson liquid inside was not wine, but something far more fitting for a vampire's diet. Ah, master, why are you angry? Did we sisters do something wrong? Please forgive us. Let us soothe your fury. Almost as soon as the cup left his fingers, Dracula's 3 vampire brides flung themselves upon him. Their ample breasts rubbed against his body as they used every limb to calm his wrath. Yet Dracula, a nobleman, at least in his own estimation, possessed breeding and poise, he would not vent his anger on his brides. Instead he resolved to send someone for blood food. He needed an outlet for his rage, and would host a grand, crimson banquet, to drown his fury in blood. At Dracula's command the vampires poured out in force, scouring the lands around Castle Dracula to seize blood food. One had to admit, humans were remarkably adaptable. Even in a country virtually ruled by vampires, people still survived. Indeed, those who lived here fared far better than most elsewhere, spared the crushing taxes and levies. As for a few deaths, under other nobles' rule in distant lands, it was never merely a few. Still, the turmoil sweeping Europe had rippled this far, though only faintly. Thus Dracula continued his petty reign as local tyrant. Unfortunately, he had no inkling that immense trouble was about to arrive. This mass vampire outing caused heavy casualties. Among the victims were church investigators sent to look into Romania's vampire legends. The sky blackened with bats and vampires snatched people openly. The priest tasked with the inquiry was aghast. He penned a lengthy report and sent it to headquarters. Receiving his message, the church at once recognized the vampire crisis and resolved to dispatch their final trump card, Van Helsing, freshly returned to headquarters. After a memorable holiday in Egypt with Victor, Van Helsing had reported back. This time he had neither slain nor captured his target, and owed the council an explanation. On the other hand, he and Victor had agreed, should he ever move against Dracula, he must notify Victor and Nina. At first he had found Victor's demand odd. He had slain many vampires, yet the church had never ordered him to confront the legendary progenitor. But when the order came, Van Helsing was stunned. How could Victor have known the church's intent? The man clearly lacked piety, and having a spy inside the church seemed impossible. Still, Van Helsing kept his word, informed Victor, and invited him along. Though Victor's strength was slightly below his own, the girl's power was bizarre and formidable. Against an undying, indestructible vampire progenitor, every extra ally helped. Van Helsing wrote, he's indeed been tasked with dealing with Dracula. You can't kill him, even with me, it's the same. We can't finish him for good, but putting him to sleep for a while sounds nice, doesn't it? At least then he'll stop sending vampires to disturb our little two-person world. Though she claimed Dracula couldn't be slain, Nina's actions belied her words. Soon Edward packed their bags. They would sail straight to the destination. Van Helsing would wait for them at the Romanian port. Upon arrival, Victor discovered Van Helsing had brought an attendant, a talented youth named Sandy. When Nina saw Sandy, her pupils narrowed. She glanced at Van Helsing as if something had clicked. Yet she told Victor nothing of what she sensed in either man. She deemed it unnecessary. Barring extraordinary events, the power within them would never awaken in their lifetimes. Van Helsing. Long time no see. Did you miss me? I missed the fine US wine you owe me, not you. Then tonight I'll let you drink your fill. Compared with Victor and Van Helsing's warmth, Nina and Sandy's greeting was cool, polite hellos, then silence. Still, Sandy couldn't help stealing glances at Edward, aware of his true identity. He wondered how the lanky Edward could transform into a 3-meter hulk, but courtesy, and other considerations, kept him from asking. Once rooms were booked, Victor and Van Helsing dashed off to drink. An angel descends to cleanse evil and filth. Intriguing. By daylight, Nina had likewise sensed potent sacred force within Sandy, essentially the same source as Van Helsing's. Her later research in grimoires indicated its origin, the legendary high heavens. Van Helsing and Sandy were angels walking the earth. Normally such divine messengers never appeared before mortals, especially in this post-myth era. Their time of activity had long passed. Yet now two had appeared at once, highly interesting. Coupled with the coming World War, much could be inferred. Legend even claimed God himself ended the other World War. Clearly both conflicts bore the shadow of the high heavens. After all, the First War's outcome had shattered the largest MSL nation, erasing it from history forever. But such matters could wait. Her first concern was handling the clingy menace of Dracula. Fail to slay the serpent and endless trouble follows, a perfect description of him. This guy simply refuses to stay dead. Provoke him once and he sticks like taffy. Even if he can't kill you, he'll disgust you half to death. Worse, their strength hasn't reached a level Dracula can't erase, so all they can do is send him on a long vacation called Resurrection. When Dracula next wakes, he'll find the world has moved on, provided Van Helsing and company actually manage to kill him this time. Just as the expedition readied to march, word reached Dracula that the church was coming for him. How the news arrived. The waters run deep, and someone always pays any price for immortality. Even if that price is freedom and the very pride of being human. Yet Dracula wasn't troubled, he was pleased, having learned something else. His spy among Van Helsing's comrades had spotted Midnight. He'd thought the vampire traitor out of reach, but there the wretch was, walking right into his grasp. Of course it brought other worries. If Midnight served that bald woman's will, Dracula might as well choose his own death and get it over with. But until she showed herself, he wouldn't act. Imagine the farce if he killed himself over nothing. Count Dracula's illustrious name would be ruined. Still, no skimping on preparation. A lion uses full force on a rabbit, and these foes were far from simple. Dracula summoned his strongest vampires to welcome Van Helsing. In this universe, Dracula had no disappointing descendants left to slay him. He'd long since erased that pitiful branch from history. Yet now a daughter existed, cursed to hunt him forever. Not that she could kill him. Dracula, empowered by the vampire progenitor, could dominate nearly every vampire. Nor was Dracula personally weak. He healed like Wolverine, commanded vast dark magic, and feared neither sunlight nor most things fatal to vampires. His strength, speed, stamina, and reflexes far outstripped common vampires, reaching terrifying heights. Only the opponents he picked were always too strong. One day he'd annoy the Sorcerer Supreme, the next flirt with Ghost Rider, then pick a fight with Doctor Doom, ending up beaten senseless and skulking home to sulk. He had one odd rule: the farther from his coffin, the weaker he became. Once he schemed in New York and was offed by Spider-Man and Blade, hardly his proudest death. Yet when he dies far from the coffin he revives quickly, die close to it, and the resurrection drags on for ages. Some speculate that killing him inside the coffin would finish him for good, but no one has ever found the thing, so no one has tested the theory. Even the mighty and wise sorcerer Ancient One never located it, though she was busy with Dormammu and various elder gods. Beside those threats, Dracula is small fry. Strong as he is, he can't leave Earth, content to lounge coffinside as a shut-in. My Lord Dracula, Jack Russell has escaped. Then what use are you? After dealing with the incompetent underling, Dracula wondered if his luck had soured again. How could a wolf he'd caged this long just bolt? More so since the werewolf's identity was delicate. Nina Price's mother had been a Russell, Jack Russell's own sister. Still, I recall that Russell couldn't master his beast, and werewolves instinctively hunt kin to infect them. Perhaps the escape isn't bad at all, he mused. While Dracula settled in to watch the drama, Jack Russell tore free of the pursuit by biting off the last vampire's bat head. A werewolf biting a vampire bat head won't catch any bat virus, but the taste was vile. Jack spat the head out anyway. With all pursuers dead, the long fur receded and the 4-meter frame shrank rapidly. A ragged, 6-foot man stood where the wolf had been. In perfect control, yet Jack Russell had beaten the demon inside him. Cursed by his bloodline, he had turned, fallen under Dracula's sway, and hurt his sister. Afterward came long imprisonment, caged in the underground room beneath Dracula's castle like a dog, nightly torn by guilt and beast. But he never gave up, wrestling for self within the beast. In time he won. He broke free, slaughtered the chasing vampires, and now walks as the Shadow Avenger, the werewolf by night. Before revenge, he must know his kin are safe. Werewolf blood lets him feel where they are. So, hesitating only a moment, Russell shifted again and loped through the forest, straight toward Victor and the others. What is it, Nina? I sense Uncle Jack. When Russell actually stood in front of Nina, he had never imagined they would meet like this. He remained in his werewolf form, suspended by the throat and held above everyone's heads. This is how you treat your uncle. You recognized him, so why hang him up there? Because I can't be sure he can keep his mind while he's shifted. Victor, however, was convinced Nina was doing it on purpose. Even he could see the rich emotion in the werewolf's eyes, yet not a trace of killing intent or bestial frenzy. Nina clearly had no intention of dragging it out, she only wanted to teach him a lesson. After all, the history between Russell and her mother was complicated. Though Russell had once hurt her mother, he had also saved her life and freed her from the family's ancient curse. The only thing no one expected was that the curse would double when it passed to Nina. That doubled curse triggered a strange fusion of lycanthropy and vampirism within her, forging the woman she had become. Of course, all of this happened in this timeline, and to Nina it was, in a sense, a reality she had lived through. So her feelings toward Russell were tangled at best. Most important, he might be the last blood kin she had left. Once Russell was lowered to the ground, he reverted to human form in an instant and tried to embrace her. Instead, he found himself wrapped in Victor's arms. He didn't know the tall young man, but he could tell the fellow meant a great deal to his niece. He also sensed from Nina's earlier attitude that she still harbored some reservations about him. After exchanging a hug with Victor, he forwent embracing Nina and turned to Van Helsing. Van Helsing? A famed demon hunter, what are you doing with them? We've arranged to take on a vampire named Dracula. Count Dracula is an old acquaintance of yours, isn't he, Mr. Russell? Russell was stunned. He knew Van Helsing's reputation, and Nina and Victor were no weaklings, but facing Dracula was another matter entirely. He had dealt with Dracula enough to know the vampire's power and terror. Victor's group stood no chance. He had to stop them. At the very least, he had to keep his niece out of it. He couldn't watch his only remaining kin walk into danger. Shifting back into a werewolf, he planted himself in their path. What are you doing, Mr. Russell? I won't let you take Nina into that peril. If you insist, you'll go through me first. If you can't handle me, you stand no chance against Dracula. Sounds like Mr. Russell doesn't trust our strength. What do you think, Victor? I'm sure he has his reasons, but since he's issued the challenge, let's prove ourselves. You want to do it, or shall I? Maybe give Sandy a turn. You sure that's all right? At Van Helsing's insistence, Sandy stepped forward and offered Russell a crisp knightly salute. As scion of an ancient line, Russell instantly recognized the ceremonial greeting of the old Templar orders. His current form prevented a proper reply, so after a nod he lunged at the young man. What followed defied his expectations. Instead of tackling the seemingly frail opponent, he found only air, and a split second later felt cold wind rushing at the back of his neck. A werewolf's raw physique and lightning reflexes let Russell whip his claws up to block just before the blade landed. Tough lichen claws met a gleaming silver sword, scattering sparks and an ear-grating screech. Clearly this attendant was anything but unremarkable. Hardly surprising, anyone chosen as Van Helsing's aide wouldn't be ordinary. Before serving the demon hunter, Sandy had been commander of the Swiss Guard. His predecessor in that post, Van Helsing himself. To deal with Count Dracula, the church was pulling out all the stops, fielding its premier demon hunter and the current, shield of the pontiff. As the Pope's last line of defense, if Sandy couldn't handle a lone werewolf, the Holy Father's safety would be in serious doubt. Russell quickly realized he was outmatched, and that Sandy was holding back. Several times the young man could have crippled him but refrained. Though Russell wore the beast's shape, he bore a noble heart. With a roar he shifted back to human form and raised his hands in surrender. I yield, young man. Your strength far surpasses what I imagined. I'm not your equal. Still, I urge you, Dracula is far stronger. Turn back. Truth is, you're worried about Nina. Honestly, she's the strongest among us. You already felt that, didn't you? Victor's answer caught Russell off guard. Then he remembered arriving only to be left helpless by Nina's telekinesis, nearly choking to death. At first he'd thought Dracula himself had attacked and resigned himself to death, until Victor's reminder made him grasp just how formidable his niece had become. Yet the revelation only deepened his worry. Nina would be Dracula's prime target, placing her in even graver peril. So he made his decision. He would stop running and join Victor's detachment against Count Dracula. Against common vampire fodder, even a modest werewolf was more than enough. And thus the company marching against Count Dracula gained another member, the vampire's ancient enemy and present-day thrall, the werewolf. Once upon a time, the werewolf clans were a mighty force that could stand toe-to-toe with the vampires. Now, they've been reduced to slaves and lackeys. The grudges and grievances behind that downfall stretch back too far and tangle too deeply to belong in this tale. What matters is that Russell's escape proves a wolf can still break the vampire's chains. Dracula will not tolerate such defiance. Russell's name went onto the death list the instant he ran. Joining this demon hunter detachment against Dracula isn't without perks. If they kill the vampire lord, Russell gains a century of freedom from pursuit. While the detachment marches out, Logan finally resolves his emotional crisis. With his help, Silver Fox recovers her stolen memories. In return, she uses her own gift to restore memories Logan had forced himself to forget, memories whose cruelty once broke him. Now, with Silver Fox beside him, he can face that pain. He accepts the past and steps into a new life. Together they settle in a quiet town on the Yukon River, though hatred and the hunger for battle still smolder inside him. He knows he's no match for Victor or Romulus yet. Charging in would only end in failure and endanger Silver Fox. If he can't even protect the woman he loves, what right has he to call himself Wolverine? So he trains while cherishing every peaceful day. He even asks Silver Fox to spar. He's fascinated by the hand ninja's techniques. From her descriptions he suspects the Victor who attacked them wasn't the real Victor. Too many things the man did contradict earlier deeds. Either Victor's mind is fracturing or someone's wearing his face. Or, the ugliest option, Victor truly is vile, and someone else impersonated him to show Logan kindness. Puzzling it out isn't Logan's strength, and Silver Fox can only take the logic so far. Their decision, once Logan is strong enough, they'll simply confront Victor, beat the truth out of him. Pretty plan, brutal reality. Right now Logan would lose that fight. If Victor comes knocking, they'll have to run. That knowledge fuels his training, and his appetite for life and for loving. Meanwhile Clone Victor has slipped into Madame Viper's bed. She's delighted with her new powerhouse. He outfights Logan and outperforms him in every other way that counts. She thought Logan represented the human peak. Clone Victor, copied from the original, proves there's always a bigger wolf. Best of all, controlling him is effortless. His ethics already match hers. Both are ruthless, selfish survivalists. Under her glamour he simply puts her wishes first. Without a fully formed identity his will is weaker than the original's, and lust binds him completely to her. Not that she needs an excuse, her allure once toppled even Captain America, a black mark the good captain will never live down. Though she's only starting out, her talent is obvious. First Logan, now Clone Victor, both ensnared. With a beauty like her in his arms, Clone Victor forgets Romulus and every other obligation. He spends his days in relentless, inexhaustible exertion. He could keep it up around the clock if he wished. Only the gifted Madame Viper could endure such stamina. An ordinary woman would have collapsed long ago. She finds a satisfaction Logan once gave, yet Logan always needed coaxing. Clone Victor is an unstoppable engine of desire. To her, this is the life she wants and the man she deserves, and he feels the same about her. Their indulgence buys Logan and Silver Fox a long stretch of peace. The only one left frustrated is Romulus. He's lost track of both Clone Victor and Logan, while his operatives are being hunted across the world by the Hand ninjas. Even he was ambushed by 9 white-cloaked ninjas of the Hand. They failed to kill him but left him battered and humiliated. 9 fighters, each barely beneath his level, together they drove him to flee. And they demanded he hand over Silver Fox. He remembers killing her himself, didn't he? Come on, every righteous team needs a catchy name. So what should we call ours? I've got a half-baked idea. Since everyone here, like my master, is a gentleman, let's call it the League of Gentlemen. Edward, I knew I could count on you. The League of Gentlemen it is, decided. The others thought the name sounded odd, yet they couldn't find fault with it. And so, thanks to Victor's insistence, the League of Gentlemen became their team's title. At this point none of them realized that this spur-of-the-moment name would still be in use all the way into the Avengers era, something they could hardly imagine now. For the moment, calling them a team was generous. Bluntly, they were a rabble. They had never worked together before, and this was their first joint operation. Each member, in truth, nursed private thoughts and prides, though none showed it. They had united for a common goal and wouldn't disband until it was met. Once consensus existed, everything else was negotiable. After everyone agreed on the priority of their first objective, they readily compromised on lesser matters. That was how this makeshift outfit held together. Everyone needed someone else. Van Helsing required Victor's strength, for he truly couldn't gauge how powerful Dracula was, legends notwithstanding. Sandy, a devout churchman, obeyed the church's arrangement and served as Van Helsing's attendant and aide. Once Van Helsing assented, Sandy would work with werewolves, vampires, or anything else without protest. Though Van Helsing still believed non-humans were no good, he didn't know Nina's true identity, taking her for merely a powerful magician. He had seen her walk in sunlight and eat ordinary food, impossible feats for any other vampire. Vampires can't endure the sun or consume human fare, their tongues know only the savor of blood, and mortal food tastes like ash without meaning. So Van Helsing's mistake was understandable, and it partly explained why he raised no objection when Russell joined. Other reasons included Nina's formidable power and the fact that Russell was her uncle. Besides, Russell's evident humanity spoke for itself. Changing his prejudice overnight was impossible, but the mere willingness to try, answering Russell instead of drawing a weapon, was already progress. Sandy, a man of few words and swift action, was only slightly less capable than Van Helsing, about on par with Victor at present. Yet he stayed silent the whole way, speaking only when questioned, and then with terse precision. This mirrored his upbringing. Like Van Helsing, he had been reared and trained by the church. Why Van Helsing turned eccentric while Sandy became a closed book, only their priest could say. In this universe, the church was truly a sanctuary of holiness, not a den of filth. Intolerant, yes, but its integrity and charity were real. Thus it dispatched yearly hordes of demon hunters and priests to every corner of the world to protect ordinary folk beset by dark creatures. Yet as secular powers grew, the church's influence waned, though it persevered rather than yield. After secular regimes suffered setbacks, they began cautiously cooperating with the church, whose authority nonetheless continued to ebb. That, however, lay in the future. For now, the church's word was law, and only its resources could mold men like Van Helsing and Sandy. Though named the League of Gentlemen, the group reminded Victor of the Howling Commandos, werewolves and vampires fighting alongside humans and getting along. Dracula did not await the church's crusade unprepared. First he purged the humans within his domain, turning church personnel into sustenance. Next he dispatched his elite Crimson Guard to intercept Van Helsing's party. He reckoned they should at least cause some trouble. Reality proved otherwise. The Guard proved no trouble at all, more like a one-sided slaughter. And only 2.5 members of the League even fought. The two were Edward and Sandy. Sandy's prowess was unquestioned, while Edward, after prolonged indoctrination and subconscious realignment, had regained equilibrium. Now both Hyde and Edward were loyal servants of the Clyde family and proud of it. Transformed into Mr. Hyde, Edward wielded Van Helsing's spare silver sword like a dagger, massacring the Crimson Guard. His unrestrained style sent vampire limbs flying and blood splattering everywhere, mess that soon turned to ash, though the others were nauseated. In contrast to Hyde's savagery, Sandy's combat was clean and elegant. Like a dancer strolling through a forest, calm and graceful, each strike was measured, just enough to kill without splattering gore. The remaining half-man was werewolf Jack Russell. After regaining freedom, the werewolf's instinctive loathing of vampires awakened in his blood. At the first sight of vampires he tore off his clothes and transformed. Victor was curious. Every time Jack shredded his clothes, they inexplicably reappeared when he changed back. Victor had specifically asked Russell about this, but Russell didn't know much either. He said it might have something to do with the fur that grew on him after he became a werewolf. Of course, Victor was no expert on dark creatures. Van Helsing could count as half of one, but his field of study was how to kill them, not how to tan their hides. He was an emotionless killer, not a leatherworker or tailor. So Victor's investigations eventually fizzled out. Nina, however, noticed another problem. Victor was turning into a bigger goofball every day, as if he'd been infected by the Holy Ten. The once cold, seasoned sabretooth now seemed to be veering off model. What she didn't know was that an even colder, crueler clone Victor was out there sullying the sabretooth name. After a month of non-stop indulgence, Clone Victor and Madame Viper finally decided to do something else, not because they were bored, but because they were broke. Homeless as they were, they'd been living in luxury hotels the whole time, insisting on the best of everything, from food to toiletries. Money poured through their fingers like water. Though Clone Victor had earned plenty as a mercenary, he'd never saved a cent, and the way they spent it couldn't last. They had to pause and find some cash. Their methods were the usual con games, fraud, theft, daylight robbery. Clone Victor was also happy to take assassination or arson contracts for pay. Still, the two of them earned far faster than Logan, who had somehow become a forest ranger. Logan and Silver Fox, however, asked for little in the way of luxury. They genuinely enjoyed their new life, deep in the woods with no one to bother them. Logan even grew a thick beard so that when he went to town for supplies or wages, old acquaintances like Victor or Romulus wouldn't spot him. It only proves how pragmatic the world is. Whether you're a supervillain or a superhero, you need money to live, and to live comfortably. When Clone Victor and Madame Viper were kicked out of the hotel, they could easily have slaughtered most of the staff, but so what? Kill them all and there'd be no one left to serve them, and the hotel would be useless. Still, on their way out, Madame Viper slipped something into the water, not fatal, for she was enjoying life too much to court trouble, but the staff would suffer. You don't cross a woman, especially one of the few in this universe no one should ever cross. At the very top of that list stands a certain bald lady. After all, she lost her hair and gained absurd power, the kind that makes cosmic bigshots of every plane think twice. Achoo, The sorcerer Ancient One sneezed, puzzled. Someone of her caliber should never catch cold. After much investigation she found no cause and set the matter aside, turning her attention back to the cauldron of all things, where Victor's group appeared. When he discovers there's another him, will he be shocked or delighted? Victor still had no idea Romulus had created a clone, or that, with a few nudges from interested parties, that clone was slipping into the role meant for him, playing Victor in this universe. So he kept fretting about the part he had to act, fighting Logan, killing innocents, everything against his own wishes. Yet the Ancient One insisted he keep up the performance and find his own solution. Was it confidence in his wit, or deliberate torment? In truth she only wanted to see his true heart. Once she saw his innate kindness, she began preparing a fall guy without his knowledge. She arranged and advanced everything behind his back, knowing that if Victor found out, his conscience would still make him intervene. He couldn't stand by while Logan or other innocents were hurt, whereas the Ancient One could. That difference defined the gap between them. Victor understands the need for sacrifice, yet still wants to save everyone. The Ancient One can sacrifice a few innocents for the sake of the many, and counts herself among the expendable. That was why, once she found her successor, she chose self-sacrifice to speed the pupil's growth, proving that everything she'd done had been right. Whether using dark forces or anything else, she paid the price herself, warning her heir to treat magic's might with caution. On this timeline, however, Nina Price had become her chosen heir, so every move was now calculated for Nina's sake. The Ancient One is wiser than most teachers or parents. She never forces her idea of best on her student, only steers the student's own choices toward the better. And along the way she spells out the price each choice demands, a feat requiring both immense power and keen intellect, of which she has plenty. Yet she can't guarantee her heir will be the same. Strong as Nina is, her wits seem to short-circuit whenever a certain mutant is involved. So, a child who refuses to let me rest easy. Although the heavy losses of the Scarlet Guard were unexpected for Dracula, he didn't feel the slightest heartache. As long as he remained alive, he could create as many of these vampires as he wanted. Moreover, he was originally an emotionless monster. He only pretended to make himself look like he had feelings. Of course, perhaps he did have feelings, just not human ones. So, when someone tried to speculate about Dracula's thoughts using human logic, they made a mistake from the very beginning. However, Victor and the others had no intention of guessing Dracula's thoughts. Their usual method was simple. Who to kill, where they are, then go there and take out the target. This time, dealing with Count Dracula would naturally be no exception. The only difference lay in the difficulty. In any case, he was dead this time. Of course, many people had gone on crusades against Dracula throughout history, and the vast majority of them never returned. So, in Dracula's eyes, Victor and the others were no different from those who came before. Although both sides looked down on each other in their hearts, they were both very cautious in actual operation. After the Scarlet Guard was wiped out, Dracula tentatively sent out more vampires, each wave larger than the last. However, the subsequent vampires he sent out also ended up with no news. This led Dracula to conclude that ordinary vampires no longer held much meaning against the opposition. Even with an absolute numerical advantage, they still posed no threat to Victor and the others. Such a result could only mean one thing: Victor and his group were worthy of his serious treatment. Thus, when Victor and the others reached the outskirts of Dracula's core territory, what greeted them was no longer the so-called elite guards or cannon fodder. Instead, it was a structured medieval army composed, of course, of vampires. This was where Victor and the others started to feel a headache, as the opponent's numbers were simply too great. After Edward transformed into Hyde and charged in about 10 meters, he was surrounded by vampires and became immobilized. In fact, his lethality against the vampires was the smallest. The tireless vampires, clad in plate armor, suffered no fatal injuries from his heavy blows. As for internal organ damage and the like, which might be fatal to humans, it was just a minor issue for a vampire. Instead, the sharp swords in their hands could easily cause damage to Mr. Hyde, and they soon successfully surrounded him, leaving him covered in wounds from their hacking. The situation on the werewolf's side was slightly better. His claws were sharp enough to tear through the vampire's armor, and the werewolf curse carried on his claws was one of the best weapons to deal with vampires. Because the werewolf curse would clash violently with the vampire curse, causing vampires who suffered both curses simultaneously to die in extreme agony. Conversely, if one became a werewolf first, they would be completely immune to the vampire curse. However, werewolves didn't have as powerful a self-healing ability as vampires. Perhaps this was a matter of gains and losses. Beings capable of withstanding both the werewolf and vampire curses simultaneously were extremely rare. So far as Russell knew, only his niece, Nina Price, was one. Although Russell could wound the vampires, he was still beaten into a wretched state by them. This was because the opponent displayed the qualities a proper army should have, trapping him through mutual cooperation and military formations. The one in the best situation was actually Sandy, who looked the weakest. Because situations like this were actually part of his daily routine. His daily training included steps for one person to deal with an entire army. Furthermore, the army he had to deal with was far more powerful than the one before him. That was the Church's final safeguard, the Night Order responsible for the security of the entire FDG. So, when facing the siege of the vampire army, Sandy not only appeared to handle it with ease but could also frequently exploit the gaps and flaws among them, making them hinder each other and unable to use their full strength. Meanwhile, the true silver holy sword in his hand flashed around the vampires like a beam of light, taking away the lives that should have already passed. But his individual efficiency was somewhat too low. Therefore, Victor and Van Helsing also had to join in. In fact, they didn't need to kill all these vampires, they only needed to hold out until dawn. After all, even wearing armor couldn't block the sun's fatal lethality to them. However, when Nina took action, Victor and the others realized they might not have to wait until dawn. Transparent magic holy swords began to fly all over the battlefield, massacring this army of vampires at a speed beyond anyone's imagination. Victor found this scene familiar. It was the same thing Hela had once done to the Asgardian army. This was a one-sided carnage, with almost no enemy lasting a single exchange. She actually possesses such massive power. Will there really be no problem? Even if there is a problem, it should be Dracula's problem. Besides, are you confident you can deal with her? The church needs to know about this. Then you write the report. The powerful strength Nina erupted with greatly shocked Van Helsing and Sandy, triggering Sandy's concern. As a knight raised by the church, his first reaction was whether this massive power would pose a threat to ordinary people and the church. Van Helsing, however, didn't think so. After wandering outside for so many years, he was no longer that greenhorn, foolish knight of justice. But this matter indeed needed to be made known to the church. Although he had vaguely sensed the other's strength, he hadn't expected her to be this powerful. Yet, thinking of her teacher, he began to feel it was only natural. As a special member, Van Helsing actually knew something about the relationship between the church and the Sanctum Sanctorum. In a sense, the church and the Sanctum Sanctorum had a certain degree of cooperation, especially when dealing with demons from the hell dimension. But their usual relationship couldn't be called good either. And this Nina Price before them was the apprentice of that woman the Pope said absolutely must not be provoked. Thinking about it carefully, after Sandy reported it, the Pope would at most have a headache over why the next leader of the Sanctum Sanctorum was yet another woman who was hard to mess with. With the vampire army's annihilation, they truly turned to dust. Since they weren't considered living people to begin with, after being killed, they would turn into ashes and disappear from this world, just like the ninjas of the hand. And the pass blocking everyone's way was directly blown away by Nina using telekinesis. This time, the one who was taken aback was Victor. Because he knew clearly that Nina's telekinesis didn't have such great power before. Was it because her mental strength had grown, so her telekinesis had also become stronger? However, since she could now wield such massive magic power, it wasn't impossible for her telekinesis to have grown. But the magnitude of this increase seemed a bit too large. Victor also discovered that the strength gap between himself and Nina seemed to be getting wider and wider. The only thing that gave him comfort was that the Reality Stone's condition was getting better and better, seemingly about to fully recover. He might be able to use the power of the Reality Stone to reclaim some of the abilities and items he had once possessed. After all, the Reality Stone's ability was to warp and create reality. But for the current situation, he still had to deal with Dracula first. Since the path forward had been opened, they shouldn't delay any longer. What are you two talking about? Let's get moving. Russell and Edward's injuries have already been treated. Alright, I just checked the map. It seems we aren't far from Dracula's castle now. Van Helsing's words made Victor feel like a greedy adventurer who had charged into Dracula's castle, killed the castle's master, and then looted all his treasures. Just like that, because of one sentence from Van Helsing, the treasures Dracula had accumulated over centuries were targeted by this unscrupulous guy, Victor. So much so that after everyone set off again, Victor specifically went to discuss with Nina how they would scour the castle and take away every valuable item after they killed Dracula. As expected of my master, even with an enemy as powerful as Dracula, he doesn't take him seriously at all. He's already considering how to handle the spoils of victory. Little did he know that his greedy face was entirely exposed to his servant, Edward. Fortunately, Nina's brainwashing work had been very successful, reaching the level of turning black into white. For such behavior from Victor, he could actually beautify it and feel admiration. From this, one could see how terrifying a powerhouse with strong telepathy abilities was. While the opponent was completely unaware, they could modify the other's cognition and thoughts, making them treat these thoughts as their own free will. Over time, the original personality would be completely replaced by this manufactured one. This was the case for Edward Hyde. The original person no longer existed, leaving only a loyal servant of the Clyde family. Of course, Nina would not abuse this ability, as she herself knew its terrifying nature and the horrific consequences it could cause. It was only because Edward's situation was extremely special. The man himself was a damn murderer. Instead of killing him directly, it was better to make use of the waste. Moreover, she was also curious about to what extent this ability could go. Looking at the current situation, the effect seemed unexpectedly good. But in this way, it also confirmed her initial worries. Once this ability was abused, it would cause extremely serious consequences. Furthermore, the sensation of freely modifying and manipulating human memories and emotions would give one the illusion of being omnipotent and supreme. Such an illusion was very terrifying, so Nina decided she must use this power cautiously in the future. She believed she had enough wisdom to wield it. And the Sorcerer Ancient One had actually also discovered this ability and talent of hers. However, she didn't say much, choosing instead to trust her student, believing she would not abuse this power. However, given the current state Edward displayed, she felt it might be better to say something after all, because this effect was almost not far from the effects of certain high-level dark magic. In fact, by this time, the Sorcerer Ancient One already knew that her disciple had reached a crossroads. The choice at this crossroads would be very crucial. The power Nina possessed was becoming stronger and stronger. Especially after coming to this world, she simultaneously obtained the power of herself from two worlds, allowing her to easily gain the power of transcendence. Her power grew every day, and she had been trying to control it. This was also why she had recently started to enjoy reading and became quieter. She had to control her daily growing power and ensure she wouldn't lose herself in it. However, this growth seemed to have reached a limit recently and started to slow down. Her massacre of the vampire army was actually a small test of her newly mastered power. She had obtained extremely massive magic power as well as precise control. Derived from this was an extremely massive spiritual force. And this spiritual force, in turn, allowed her will and telekinesis to gain extremely powerful growth. When that pass was blown into the sky by her telekinesis, the vampire Dracula had dispatched to monitor the results near the battlefield was scared out of his wits. He rushed back to Dracula's castle at his fastest speed and told his master everything he had seen. This included the annihilation of the vampire army and the blown-away pass. Heh, the little girl from back then has grown up now. To think she possesses such powerful strength, it seems things are indeed a bit tricky. Although he said it was a bit tricky, Dracula still did what he usually did. He continued to embrace his bride and carry on with his blood feast. He only sent out a few more vampires to deal with Victor and the others. In any case, these servants were worthless in his eyes, and because of their immortality, there was a trend of their numbers increasing. So he decided to take this opportunity to clean up all the vampires he was dissatisfied with, disliked, or felt were too many. Otherwise, if this continued, the castle and territory would be overrun with vampires. Noble vampires couldn't be like rats, with a whole nest squeezed under the roof of one castle. However, his banquet couldn't last for too long, at least from a vampire's sense of time, because someone kicked open the castle gates and barged in with weapons. Dracula, your end has come. Dracula, your time has come. Sandy's roar flew in along with the castle parlor door. Yes, that roar actually came from Sandy. This seemingly weak and quiet guy would actually appear exceptionally fanatical when dealing with dark creatures. However, Victor was naturally 12/10 satisfied with his excellent work attitude. After all, while it wasn't impossible for him to kick the castle door flying, his toes would have hurt. And Sandy lived up to being the man called the Pope's Shield. He kicked such a heavy door panel flying without even changing his expression. One wondered if his toes actually hurt. Dracula didn't know if Sandy's toes hurt, but Dracula was quite heartbroken. He had used that door panel for hundreds of years. People who came to kill him before either climbed through windows or used the back door. So this door panel had survived all along. This time, Van Helsing brought people to kill their way in directly from the main entrance. This door panel, the only one that hadn't been replaced for many years, finally had to be replaced now. Dracula was naturally distressed by this. It was the only legacy left from this castle from when he was still a living person. Having it destroyed by Sandy's kick made him so angry that he threw the wine glass he had raised halfway. As Dracula threw the glass, all the vampires attending the banquet, including Dracula's brides, rushed toward the intruders. As vampires capable of attending a banquet hosted by Dracula, they all had some status and strength. Yet even so, they were still no match for Van Helsing and the others. This was because Nina used her magic to cheat a little. She opened a portal, and on the other side was a sun-drenched Hawaiian beach. Supported by Nina's vast magical power, this portal was not much smaller than the castle's main entrance. So almost in an instant, sunlight passed through the portal she opened, completely illuminating this castle hall that hadn't seen sunlight for hundreds of years. For vampires, the most fatal thing was never crusaders or silver weapons, but the light from the sun. This light of life for humans was the soul-reaping Yama for vampires. Therefore, this sunlight from Hawaii achieved a fairly good clearing effect. Except for a very few quick-reacting fish that slipped through the net and hid, along with Dracula, the other vampires were basically wiped out in one wave. And Dracula's own hand was also inadvertently exposed to the sunlight. With a light sizzling sound, the originally fair and smooth skin on his hand instantly began to fester and emit puffs of blue smoke. Feeling the long-lost pain, the anger and humiliation in Dracula's heart grew even stronger. Therefore, he no longer continued to sit and act elegant but directly manifested the most powerful and hideous form of the vampire progenitor and rushed toward Victor and the others. His primary target was Nina, who had cast the magic to open the spatial portal. He even ignored the attacks from others for this, and his method indeed had an effect. While dodging his attacks, Nina also had to give up maintaining the portal. As the sunlight disappeared, the vampires who had been hiding in the shadows rushed out again. Moreover, Victor and the others soon discovered that the number of vampires rushing out seemed to be even more than before Nina cleared the field. This made them realize that Dracula had set a trap from the beginning, waiting for them to walk into the net. However, since they chose to break in through the main entrance, it meant they had never been afraid of traps. But this number was indeed a bit too much. However, in terms of strength, they were far inferior to the previously well-coordinated classical vampire legion. In fact, the destruction of that legion had given Dracula a great deal of shock. After all, he had spent a lot of time training them with his rich military experience. And with the unique advantages of vampires, that army could be considered a strong one. As a result, they were wiped out by the opponent just like that. It would be a lie to say he wasn't distressed. But to say he was very distressed, that wouldn't be true either. Because he had endless life and time, weren't such toys something he could get easily whenever he wanted. But now that the opponent had actually come to his door, he didn't mind killing these humans to avenge his toy legion. However, looking at the current situation, the tenacity of these humans seemed to exceed his imagination. Moreover, among these intruders, it seemed they weren't all humans, there were also several of his acquaintances. For example, Werewolf Jack, who had escaped some time ago, and the traitor, Midnight, whom he regarded as a thorn in his side. There was also the famous demon hunter Van Helsing, who had killed many vampires all over the world. Although he knew from the beginning that someone was coming to kill him, it was another matter entirely when he actually faced it. First, he lost a large number of skilled ambushers under Nina's unexpected sunlight attack. Then the remaining small fry couldn't even manage to pin down the opponent. Even that werewolf and the brute Hyde could easily deal with Dracula's disappointing low-level vampires. And these low-level vampires, under Dracula's absolute control, even if their hearts were filled with fear and resentment, still had to rush forward one after another to their deaths. Dracula didn't feel the slightest heartache for the death of such cannon fodder, he even felt a little excited. Of course, what made him excited was not the death of these cannon fodder, but the bloody scenes before their deaths. This made his offensive against Nina become increasingly crazy and fierce. However, the actual effect produced was quite limited. Whether it was his black magic or his fangs and claws, he could hardly touch the corner of Nina's clothes. However, the counterattacks launched by Nina also had a very limited effect on him. Instant cast magic with less power was simply ignored by Dracula. The damage these spells caused him could almost be considered negligible. He himself had high magic resistance, plus an exaggeratedly strong recovery ability. This level of attack didn't even count as scratching an itch. Powerful delayed magic, on the other hand, had no chance of being used. As for other attack methods like telekinesis, they were also ineffective in the face of Dracula's teleportation ability. So the two vampires just teleported here and there throughout the castle. No one knew exactly what they were doing or what the specific battle situation was. Of course, the others didn't have much time to pay attention to them. They were all busy slaughtering the vampire grunts. And the vampire grunts were busy being slaughtered. Of course, among these grunts, there were also many experts mixed in, trying to launch sneak attacks on Victor and the others in the chaos. And one of the standouts was currently targeting Werewolf Jack, who had his back turned. Van Helsing, who was busy using his handheld saw blade to perform an amputation on a vampire, didn't notice the sneak attack from behind. Of course, this was also related to this vampire's unique ability. He could hide his form, achieving a state where he emitted almost no killing intent or sound before striking. However, his assassination attempt still failed because his target was protected by the strongest shield. In fact, this was why Van Helsing dared to let loose and slaughter in all directions, because he had Sandy protecting his back. The werewolf and Mr. Hyde didn't have such good luck. However, neither of them completely disregarded their own safety like Van Helsing. Instead, they utilized their powerful strength and physical attributes to constantly leap around the castle. The actions of these two big guys completely destroyed all the furniture and decorations in the castle. It was foreseeable that after this battle, the place would likely need redecorating, or even rebuilding. As for why it might need rebuilding, it was because Nina and Dracula had both prepared their own hidden, high-power magic. A powerful impact rippled out from where the two clashed, sending Victor and the others flying along with the vampires. Blown away along with them was Dracula's ancient castle, which had centuries of history. One could say that this time, Dracula's home was truly being demolished. This made him increasingly angry and crazed, but it didn't give him the upper hand in the exchange. In fact, the strength gap between the two wasn't large, or rather, they were almost equal. They could neither harm each other nor free up their hands to deal with the other's companions or subordinates. Overall, however, the situation had begun to tilt more and more toward Victor's side. This was because Dracula's side ultimately lacked high-end combat power. In the end, he had underestimated Victor and the others too much, failing to awaken the true powerhouses among his subordinates and instead letting them remain in their slumber. By the time he realized this, his cannon fodder subordinates had already been cleared out by Victor, Van Helsing, and the others. The group stood below, watching him and Nina engage in a one-on-one duel. As gentlemen, they naturally couldn't sit by and watch a vampire bully a lady, so they decided to act heroically. However, there was one problem: none of them could fly. At this moment, Dracula and Nina were dueling in the sky. Fortunately, Dracula had momentarily dazed off upon discovering his subordinates had been wiped out. This gave Nina a great opportunity, and a powerful blast of white magic hit him directly in the face, knocking him from mid-air straight into the ground. With a thunderous boom, a human-shaped crater appeared at the feet of the gentleman. The long-waiting group of gentlemen rushed toward Dracula. Dracula didn't even have time to crawl out before a wooden stake was driven into his heart. Although this couldn't kill him, it greatly restricted his mobility. And so, Dracula fell into the hands of Van Helsing and the others, becoming their prisoner. However, they didn't intend to take him back alive. The church's orders were to execute Dracula on the spot. But they soon discovered that while Dracula was captured, they seemingly couldn't kill him. Furthermore, although Dracula had lost his mobility, his mouth wasn't blocked. He began to incessantly curse and spew profanities, to the point where they eventually had to find something to try and gag him. However, almost nothing could withstand the sharp fangs of the vampire progenitor. And even with his mouth blocked, he could still use some other method to continue making pleasant sounds. His behavior began to annoy everyone, prompting them to speed up his disposal. They first thought of the simplest method: soaking Dracula in holy water. The scene was like pouring a basin of cold water into hot oil. The vat containing the holy water exploded instantly. Dracula's skin began to rapidly fester where it touched the holy water. But soon, it healed back to its original state even faster. Dracula even let out a burp, exhaling a puff of green smoke. It seemed that while holy water could cause surface damage to Dracula, it had no substantial effect. As for silver crosses and the like, they melted as soon as they touched him. The only cross that lasted a bit longer was a necklace carried by the current pope for prayer. To eliminate evil, the pope contributed it anyway. But now it seemed that the evil hadn't been eliminated, while the pope had lost his beloved trinket. Dracula even flashed a mocking smile at this, making Van Helsing even more furious. However, Victor noticed something else in that smile. He decisively reached out and grasped the wooden stake driven into Dracula's heart. He then discovered that the depth of the stake was nearly 1/5 shallower than when it was first inserted. What a pity, you actually noticed. Humph. It seems driving a stake into the heart isn't a permanent way to disable his mobility. We have to be careful. We must re-deepen the stake at regular intervals, otherwise he might sneakily escape. As he spoke, Victor heavily drove the stake back in and gave it a forceful twist. Dracula showed no sign of pain. Instead, he flashed another mocking smile. Victor didn't pay much attention to this and directly began preparing the next method with the others, letting Dracula enjoy a sunbath. It turned out that the sun truly was the bane of vampires. Even someone as powerful as Dracula couldn't help but let out a miserable wail after being exposed to the midday sun. The dazzling sunlight was like the sharpest razor, stabbing into Dracula's body and soul. Under the sun's rays, Dracula's skin constantly melted like a heated wax statue. But he did not die. His powerful self-healing ability was constantly regenerating his melting body. This plunged him into prolonged torture, and the sunlight damaged not just his body, but also his darkness-filled soul. Even so, Dracula still didn't die. Eventually, he even looked like a lit candle, with pure white flames erupting all over his body. In this manner, Dracula wailed miserably from noon until the sun went down, but it ended there. Once the last sliver of the sun's light faded, he instantly returned to his original state. Even the wooden stake originally driven into his heart had only a short section left sticking out of his chest. Oh no! Just as Van Helsing was about to rush over to stop Dracula from escaping, the wooden stake automatically plunged back in, even deeper than before. Van Helsing looked at Nina in confusion. Nina returned a reserved smile and signaled for him to continue finding a way to deal with Dracula. They then tried a series of traditional methods for killing vampires, even going as far as feeding Dracula garlic. In the end, aside from making Dracula's foul language smell like garlic, it didn't have much of an effect. Of course, Dracula was still put through the ringer. This was one of the few truly unlucky days he had experienced in hundreds of years. Aside from being taught a lesson by those indescribable big shots back then, Dracula had rarely encountered a life-threatening crisis. Even if he did, he wouldn't truly die. However, being captured and relentlessly tormented by a group of people who weren't much stronger than himself was a form of torture that far exceeded simply being killed. For him, this was a massive insult. Our Lord Dracula still considered himself a proud noble to his core. Now, he had become meat on a cutting board, at the mercy of others. The problem was that they couldn't seem to kill him, which made him even more frantic. It wasn't that they couldn't hurt him, but rather that the damage wasn't enough to kill him, especially since his coffin was hidden not far away. While others certainly couldn't find its location, the constant stream of power from the coffin meant he couldn't be easily killed. This was actually a form of disguised torture. It hurt, but he wouldn't die. It was the kind of pain that never went numb and that his body could never adapt to, leaving Dracula utterly miserable. After a few days, Dracula didn't even have the strength or the desire to curse anymore. Though his body still twitched in agony, he lay on the platform like a limp salted fish, letting Van Helsing do as he pleased. He realized that escaping was impossible, and suicide was even more out of the question. As the grand progenitor of vampires, how could he kill himself over such a trivial matter? Thus, this mutual annoyance continued for another full day. I recall that Dracula seems to get weaker the further he is from his coffin. But we don't know where his coffin is. Do you have a way to find it? While Victor couldn't find Dracula's coffin, he knew one thing: it had to be nearby. That was why Dracula possessed such immense power and was so difficult to kill. We don't need to find where his coffin is, we just need to know it's definitely somewhere nearby. So, we just need to get away from this place and then find a way to kill Dracula. Van Helsing truly was the church's strongest demon hunter. His mind was sharp. With just a hint from Victor, he immediately realized the solution. Of course, their words reached Dracula's ears as well. But the expected resistance never came. Dracula remained passive. On one hand, he could hardly resist. On the other, he was fed up with the torment and wanted a quick release. Dracula, who had always been the one to disgust others, was finally the one being disgusted today. In a sense, Van Helsing truly lived up to his reputation as the bane of vampires and Dracula. Things became simple after that. After opening a portal to a deserted island on the equator, they brought Dracula to this place far from his coffin and homeland. It was uninhabited year-round, a paradise for flora and fauna. Of course, what this place had most of was intense, unparalleled sunlight. To ensure Dracula was thoroughly dead, they forced him to drink a large bottle of high-purity holy water and fed him garlic. Finally, when the sun reached its zenith, Dracula turned into a pile of garlic-scented ash. Naturally, in the next instant, he appeared within his hidden coffin to begin a long cycle of resurrection. With Dracula's death, the majority of the low-level vampires rampant across the world wailed and died as well. This was Dracula reclaiming his power to resurrect himself. As long as vampires weren't extinct in this world, Dracula would not die. However, the fewer the vampires, the stronger Dracula would become and the faster he would resurrect. Of course, the method to truly kill Dracula wasn't that simple. This single step alone showed how difficult it was to completely eliminate him. Furthermore, Dracula was actually quite low-key for a vampire. he wouldn't truly provoke anyone capable of killing him for good. Or rather, he hadn't yet encountered anyone who could. So there was a reason Dracula had remained unscathed for so long. Clearly, though, even he had his failures, and this was one of them. Fortunately, he had enough capital to start over, though by the time he resurrected, the people who had dealt with him this time would likely be long gone. In fact, the moment Dracula turned to ash, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was on the brink of disbanding. Van Helsing and Sandy needed to return to the church to report. Victor wanted to continue his travels with Nina, as they had only just set out. Werewolf Jack, on the other hand, felt a bit lost. He hadn't yet decided what he wanted to do. At first, all he thought about was escaping Dracula's control, and he had prepared himself to be hunted by vampires. But now the vampire threat was gone, and his identity made it difficult to integrate into society, leaving him confused. In the end, Victor solved his problem and dealt with Edward at the same time. He sent both of them back to London to watch over his house. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about burglars breaking into their home while he and Nina were traveling. Instead, it was the burglars who would have to worry, as they would be facing the wrath of a werewolf and Mr. Hyde. Now that all the third wheels are gone, where should we go next? Back to Egypt, to see the pyramids. Even though Nina said that, Victor knew she didn't really want to see the pyramids. Instead, she wanted to use the opportunity to investigate information regarding Apocalypse. Of course, the pyramids were still on the itinerary. Victor and Nina, who had traveled to Egypt, successfully visited the pyramids, but they found no trace of Apocalypse whatsoever. There weren't even any myths or legends circulating, which they found quite strange. Because no matter how deep something is buried, some unofficial histories or myths should still persist. The current situation seemed as if someone had specifically conducted a thorough purge. However, the two didn't take this matter too much to heart. After returning empty-handed, they set out on their journey once more. This time, they would cross the Atlantic Ocean to reach the east coast of the Federation. At this time, the Federation was not as developed as it would be in the future, so tourism mostly consisted of sightseeing rather than being dominated by the entertainment industry as it would be later. In fact, Victor and Nina's destination wasn't the Federation itself, they were merely using New York as a transit point to continue their journey to Canada. Just as Victor and the others were preparing to board a ship in Suez, a piece of news from the Hand's headquarters caught his attention. Silver Fox, who had been sent out by members of the Chaste, seemed to have gone missing. To be precise, she had been out of contact for a while. However, given the special nature of her mission, being unreachable for a period was considered normal. But this time, the silence had lasted far too long, and even the Hand ninjas responsible for following up could not find her whereabouts. This made the members of the Chaste realize that something might have happened to her. Still, they did not immediately seek help from Victor, because in their view, such a small matter shouldn't trouble him. If they had to seek him out for every little thing, they would be far too incompetent. It wasn't until the second piece of intelligence sent back by the investigating ninjas actually involved Victor that they realized the situation might not be so simple. According to the intelligence from the ninjas, someone resembling Victor had been sighted at the locations where Silver Fox appeared before and after her disappearance. However, the members of the Chaste knew that the Master of the Hand should currently be traveling in Europe. They could confirm this through reports from Victor's bodyguard ninjas, and because of their contract, the Hand ninjas would never mistake their master's identity. But Silver Fox was different. Although she had joined the Hand and received ninja training, she had not signed that contract. She had no way of distinguishing the real Victor from a fake if the imposter's disguise was perfect enough. Because of this, Silver Fox's loss of contact might not mean something happened to her, but rather that she had chosen to disappear. As a ninja meticulously trained by them, she should possess at least that much skill. Since the issue now involved Victor, it was only right to notify him. Otherwise, they would be showing a lack of respect for the Master of the Hand. While notifying Victor, they also guaranteed that they would personally resolve the problem. They promised not to let it delay his journey, allowing him to accompany Nina in peace. As for how much of that was a genuine wish for Victor to have fun, and how much was a desire to prevent Victor from returning to take control of the Hand, only they themselves knew. True to their word, the members of the Chaste personally took a ship to the soil of the Federation. While they landed on the west coast, Victor and Nina landed in New York on the east coast. Since their goals were different, Victor spent about 10 days wandering around New York State with Nina, taking in the 19th-century atmosphere of New York. Upon landing, the chase immediately contacted the hand ninjas responsible for the Federation region and began their pursuit of Silver Fox. Having opposed the hand for centuries, the chased, though far fewer in number, possessed extraordinary qualities that far surpassed those of ordinary hand ninjas. They quickly found clues left behind by Silver Fox and tracked them all the way to where Logan and the others had fought. Through analysis, they discovered that a battle had indeed taken place there. The combat had been intense, resulting in small-scale permanent terrain changes at the site. Based on the information they gathered, the nearby claw marks and crushed rocks did indeed look like traces Victor would leave behind. Look at these claw marks, both the force and the distribution are almost identical to that one's. Unless he has a twin brother, someone's disguise is so perfect even he himself might not be able to tell the difference. This is getting interesting. It's impossible for the hand ninjas to mistake their own master. Furthermore, he has no reason to act. If he wanted to deal with Logan and Silver Fox, he could have done so long ago. Interesting. Shut up, X3. Judging by the number of people who left at the end, there seemed to be no casualties. The question then was, whom should they track? Whether to continue tracking Silver Fox or to pursue the Victor imposter was a dilemma. Ultimately, they decided to track the imposter first, because they could find a way to track Silver Fox whenever they wished. However, the implications of this imposter were not simple. As the controller of the hand, if Victor were being impersonated, it could potentially bring an unknown crisis to the entire organization, especially since the disguise was so good that no one except the hand ninjas could tell the difference. Out of caution, they relayed the situation they found to Victor before pursuing the imposter. By the time Victor received this message, he was already within the borders of the Maple Leaf country. He had even bought a husky puppy, intending to take it back and raise it as a pet. As he looked at Nina holding the puppy, he suddenly recalled the cats he once kept, wondering if they were doing well. However, he quickly pulled himself out of his memories, preparing to head to the next attraction. After all, only old people like to reminisce about the past, and he was still very young. As for where to go next, he had already decided: the Yukon River. The Yukon River of this era possessed the most magnificent primitive scenery, but its danger was directly proportional to its beauty. As a land rich in gold, countless gold prospectors flocked here, yet very few managed to return. However, an environment that was fatal to ordinary people was nothing more than a gentle breeze to Victor and Nina. Thus, they were able to witness many beautiful sights that common folk would rarely see in a lifetime. When Logan and Silver Fox decided to go into hiding, they chose a place on the Yukon River that was scenic and resource-rich but sparsely populated, which is why they decided to stay there. But on this day, Logan's little home would welcome two old friends who were both strange and familiar to them. It seems we're out of luck. This place already has an owner. Though I say that, should we pay them a visit? After all, ordinary people can't survive here. You have a point. Let's go see who can survive in this uninhabited land. The two discussed who might live there as they walked towards the dwelling they discovered. The owner of the house clearly noticed their approach, as the man who was inside the house walked out. However, when the two sides finally met, both were surprised. Logan was surprised that Victor Creed had pursued him all the way here, and even brought Nina Price with him. And Victor was surprised that the people here were actually Logan and Silver Fox. And it looked like the two had been living here for a long time. Combining their reactions upon seeing him with the previous message from the hand ninjas, it seemed someone had indeed impersonated him to attack Logan and Silver Fox. Hey, Logan. Listen to me, I'm not. Your lies can't fool my nose, Victor. Since you've chased me all the way here, it can only end in a fight to the death. These young people nowadays, why won't they listen to advice? Forget it, let me see how much you've improved, Logan. Before Victor could finish speaking, Logan had already pounced. It must be said that Logan's opening move was always a pounce, and Victor was no different. Except this time, Victor stood his ground to meet Logan's pounce, which put him at a momentary disadvantage. Logan's powerful momentum from the pounce successfully sent Victor stumbling backward. However, Victor quickly turned the tables. Using the force of his fall, he leaned back on the ground and kicked his legs upward, sending Logan, who had intended to pin him, flying away. And he didn't give Logan a chance to pounce again. Instead, he directly flipped over and counterattacked. But Logan's reaction wasn't slow either. and the two collided once more. Their hands gripped each other's arms, their bulging muscles showing they were locked in a fierce struggle. In such a struggle, there could be no hint of weakness, or they would fall into an absolute disadvantage. While Logan and Victor were in a stalemate, Silver Fox, unwilling to be idle, tried to attack Nina. However, the difference in their strength was too great. Silver Fox was directly pushed away by psychic power, crashing into the house wall and passing out. Of course, Nina had controlled her strength and did not cause substantial harm to Silver Fox. But all of this still stimulated Logan, making him even more furious. Victor, on the other hand, showed a helpless, bitter smile. But he couldn't just watch Silver Fox attack Nina without letting her fight back, could he? So, Victor actually had no objection to Nina's actions. Since Nina had dealt with Logan's woman, as a man, he couldn't be too incompetent. So, he decided to quickly take care of the rampaging Logan in front of him and finish the fight swiftly. However, he underestimated Logan's growth and resilience. Even after he increased his strength, Logan still held on. And he even seemed to be subtly gaining the upper hand, which made Victor feel that things were getting more and more interesting. It seems Logan has been training diligently these days. I wonder what kind of stimulus he received to work so hard on his body. After all, according to James's usual behavior, he always relied on his healing factor and physical prowess, never deliberately exercising his body. But this way, isn't it more interesting? A one-sided crushing defeat only brings temporary pleasure. Only a hearty, prolonged battle is Victor's favorite. As the two continued to grapple, a look of excitement began to appear on Victor's lips. Then, a red light flashed in his eyes, and Logan felt the force on his arm suddenly increase dramatically. He was then thrown out by Victor, but he didn't fall to the ground. Instead, he regained his balance in the air, half crouching, ready to meet Victor's follow-up attack. And Victor did indeed pursue, and the two tangled together again. Their fists and claws continuously attacked each other's bodies, splashing drops of blood. Normally, their wounds would quickly heal and stop bleeding, leaving no trace of injury. But this time, they fought so fiercely that their wounds were torn open again by the opponent's continuous attacks just as they were halfway to recovery. Soon, their clothes were torn into blood-soaked rags, but neither gave up, nor did either fall. If they could have fought all day. However, one person didn't want to wait any longer, because Silver Fox, who had just passed out, was about to wake up again. Nina felt that Victor was troublesome in this regard. He tended to get carried away in fights and then it would never end. With a thought from her, the two who were still wrestling on the ground instantly went from rolling on the ground to scratching each other in the air, and when they were finally completely separated, they still didn't forget to continue kicking each other with their feet. I think you two have had enough. Victor has been with me this whole time. We just arrived on the American continent not long ago, but we have received information about the people who attacked you. Is what you're saying true? Logan, who had been struggling to break free from Nina's telekinetic control, immediately stopped his movements upon hearing her explanation. Because he also realized that his struggle was futile, he couldn't break free from her telekinesis. On the other hand, after a red light flashed in Victor's eyes, he easily broke free from the controlled state. And the red light that flashed in his eyes was actually a reaction phenomenon produced when he used the power of the Reality Stone. The Reality Stone, having regained its power, could finally provide him with substantial help. Especially in the face of these abilities with special properties, the Reality Stone works wonders. It can easily nullify the effects of these abilities. As for Logan, after hearing Nina's explanation, he also somewhat reacted. Because with Nina's strength, it might be a bit troublesome to deal with him, but killing Silver Fox would be very simple. But she merely knocked her out, and the Victor who attacked them at that time was not accompanied by Nina. After all, if they were to deal with him, bringing Nina would be the best option, wouldn't it? And most importantly, he had never seen Victor and Nina separated. They were practically inseparable. Just as Victor and Logan were reunited here, the Hands Red Ninjas, who had received Victor's secret orders, finally found Muramasa's whereabouts. As a legendary demonic blade of Japan, Muramasa has always been associated with various legends. However, those who could truly obtain it were few and far between, especially when its forger and true master was actually still alive. But recently, Muramasa, as the forger and master of this blade, discovered an extremely awkward situation. His beloved blade and masterpiece no longer belonged to him, it seemed to have a new master. As the forger and keeper of the demonic blade, when the destined master of the Muramasa in this era appeared, he would lose ownership of it and quietly wait for the new master to come and claim the blade. And when the master of this generation died from the curse of the demonic blade, he would regain ownership and take the blade back into safekeeping. This was the destiny he foresaw when he forged the demonic blade. But the recent changes in the demonic blade seemed somewhat eerie. The originally pitch-black blade had actually turned an even more ominous blood red. Although its hardness and sharpness were undiminished, such a strange situation had never occurred before. Furthermore, the one who came knocking this time was not the master or holder of this generation of Muramasa. Instead, it was the famous The Hand, who originally took orders from the Viper clan as their lackeys. Muramasa, being in the same island nation, naturally was not ignorant of The Hand, the largest dark and evil organization in the country. However, up until now, both sides had been in a state of minding their own business. Muramasa only ruled over his country, actually just a small village, while The Hand was spread all over the world. There were originally no conflicts of interest between the two sides. Muramasa had even sold some weapons to The Hand. Although The Hand ninjas would be resurrected after they died, their clothes and weapons would still wear out. But this time, The Hand ninjas were clearly not here for ordinary weapons. They directly presented a calling card, hoping Muramasa would hand over the weapon named after him. The leading red-clad jonin had originally thought it would take a fierce battle before Muramasa and his subordinates would yield. He hadn't expected the other party to directly send the blade over along with a reply. Seeing how sensible the other party was, he couldn't say much more, so he left behind the prepared heavy gifts and led his people away from the village ruled by Muramasa. What he didn't know was that once Muramasa realized a new master for the demonic blade had appeared, he didn't care whose hands the blade fell into for the time being, because fate would deliver this blade into the hands of the master who truly deserved to hold it. The arrival of the Hand ninjas even saved him the trouble of finding the person and delivering the blade. Moreover, he could receive a large amount of valuable gifts. Why not? As for Victor's side, he wasn't actually that surprised that the Hand knew the whereabouts of Muramasa, because he had once seized a Muramasa from the Hand before the reboot. So in this universe, it was perfectly normal for the Hand and Muramasa to have dealings. What he didn't expect, however, was that Muramasa would so readily hand over the weapon named after him. Although Victor had the Hand ninjas bring gifts and prepared to use force if diplomacy failed, he thought there would definitely be a fight in the end. Who knew Muramasa would just take the gifts and hand over the blade directly? Furthermore, the feedback from the red-clad jonin in charge of this matter was that this blade should be the Muramasa Victor was looking for. However, a detail mentioned by the jonin still surprised Victor. That was, the blade of this sword was not black, but red. Muramasa's reply, however, explained this. The original blade was black, but several years ago, due to some kind of mutation, the blade suddenly turned from pitch black to blood red. And besides its sharpness, it also gained the ability to prevent wounds from healing. After receiving this message, Victor looked up at Logan, who was sitting across from him. Then, after exchanging a look with Nina, they continued their previous conversation. After clearing up the related misunderstandings, Logan and Silver Fox were finally willing to sit down and have a good talk with Victor and the others. From Logan's description, Victor did indeed learn a lot of information. At the very least, Logan could not distinguish the difference between Victor and that imposter through his senses and smell. In fact, only a few people who did not belong to this era could do that. But obviously, those people could not appear here and now. Then there was only one other possibility, that imposter really was Victor. But not him personally, but his clone. And in this era, there was indeed one person who could theoretically do such a thing. Combined with the fact that he and Nina had found nothing while investigating Apocalypse in Egypt, that person's name was ready to come out. Mr. Sinister, Essex. But why would he do this? Where did the other party get the materials, and what was the reason for doing so? All were mysteries. However, Victor had some guesses about this, because there was indeed one person who could both come into contact with Mr. Sinister and had also had extremely serious conflicts with both himself and Logan. It seemed he would eventually have to resolve this hidden threat, otherwise, the trip wouldn't be able to continue properly. As for his clone, he would leave that to Logan to deal with. Anyway, it wasn't as if Logan hadn't killed one before, and even the weapon had been prepared for him. If he still couldn't handle it, then he wouldn't deserve to be called Wolverine and might as well be called a husky. Later, my subordinates will bring you a katana. This blade can suppress the healing factor in our bodies. Take it and deal with that guy impersonating me. Of course, this blade is also very dangerous for us. Be careful not to hurt yourself, or it will be very troublesome. Why are you giving such a weapon to me? Why don't you just go yourself? I'm going to deal with another trouble, the one who started all of this. I originally wanted to deal with this problem after my trip was over, but since he's being so restless, I have to solve it early so I can travel in peace. While Victor and Logan were discussing how to deal with the clone and the mastermind behind him, the members of the Chaste and the Hand Ninjas were the first to discover the whereabouts of the clone and Madame Viper. They really do look exactly the same. Even their auras are the same. Are you sure this really isn't your master? The woman next to him is different. This woman is weak as hell. Unlike that young girl, who is ridiculously powerful. Different. Shut up, X3. The moment those idiots from the Chase discovered the clone of Victor, they were simultaneously spotted by him. He immediately entered a state of high alert and told Madame Viper to prepare for combat and a quick escape. As for those idiots from the Chaste, well, they were now the elders of the Hand. One thing remained unchanged, however, their essential idiocy. Realizing they had been exposed, they leaped out into the open and struck their classic entrance poses. Thus, Clone Victor witnessed a group of middle-aged and elderly men, with an average age of over 50, performing a full set of Chiyanibuya-style poses in front of him. Then, before he and Madame Viper could even recover from the visual shock, they charged. Even so, the beastly instincts Clone Victor inherited from the original allowed him to successfully dodge the attacks from the Chaste. As for Madame Viper, it went without saying. She was always the one ambushing others. No one had ever successfully ambushed her. The very second the members of the Chaste jumped out, she was already prepared to dodge to the side. She saw through them at a glance. Those ridiculous poses were nothing more than a distraction to create an opening for a sudden strike. Thinking you can fool me with such meager skills? When it comes to sneak attacks, I'm a seasoned pro. Diverting an enemy's attention before launching a sneak attack was a tactic Madame Viper used frequently. This was why she could see through the Chaste's plan instantly. The only difference was that she usually used her own body to distract others. After all, most men would lust after her body, with the exception of a very few eunuchs. This trick even worked on many women, though not as effectively as it did on men. Of course, they didn't lust after her body, they were simply jealous of it. But all roads led to Rome. As long as her goal of diverting their attention was achieved, it was fine. Therefore, after dodging the sudden attack from the Chaste, Madame Viper tried her old trick again. This time, however, she encountered those very few exceptions. So big. So round. So fierce. Despite their words, the three masters of the Chaste responsible for dealing with Madame Viper didn't pause their movements for a second. As masters who had transcended low-level desires, they were immune to such petty tricks. Wow, you're actually not lusting after me. You're all eunuchs. Actually, I'm still lusting. Me too. You're all despicable. But, so fragrant. Madame Viper finally saw through the nature of these three idiots. What they said was one thing, but their strikes were more ruthless than anyone else's. And for the three masters of the Chaste, who had seen countless people and traveled thousands of miles, Madame Viper's true nature was clear to them at a glance. They were masters with taste, not just any worn-out shoe could hook them. Realizing her charm was ineffective, Madame Viper had no choice but to brace herself and focus entirely on fending off the three masters' offensive. On the other side, Clone Victor, besieged by the remaining six masters, was immediately plunged into a crisis. Although he was more than a match for any one of them individually, the gap wasn't insurmountable. Consequently, when the six masters attacked with perfect coordination, the clone was suppressed almost instantly. However, he wasn't defeated yet because he possessed a unique advantage, his self-healing ability. Furthermore, the members of the Chaste weren't dealing lethal blows, they wanted to capture him alive. This gave Victor's clone the chance to avoid being immediately subdued. Nevertheless, looking at the situation on the field, things weren't looking good for either him or Madame Viper. Moreover, finding an opportunity to break through was difficult because, in addition to the members of the Chaste attacking them, there was a large number of hand ninjas surrounding the area, providing support for the idiots from the Chaste. The situation is a bit dire. looks like I have to use my trump card. Ophelia, prepare to evacuate. With that, Victor pulled a handful of grenades from his pocket. The elders of the chase didn't know what they were, but they guessed they were nothing good, as they sensed extreme danger emanating from them. The moment Clone Victor pulled out the grenades, Madame Viper began to dodge and flee outward frantically. Seeing her reaction, the members of the chase instinctively did the same. Their instincts proved correct. The soaring flames and flying shrapnel clearly demonstrated the lethality of those grenades. But while these things were fatal to ordinary people, they were a minor issue for a clone who had inherited Victor's self-healing ability. Not only was he not killed by the blast, but he used the impact of the shockwave to escape the encirclement of the hand ninjas. Madame Viper was already waiting for him nearby, fully prepared. After regrouping with Clone Victor, she immediately threw several smoke grenades. However, the smoke they emitted was an eerie green. The first few hand ninjas who chased after them collapsed the moment they touched or inhaled the green smoke. Soon after, they turned into flying ash, leaving only their weapons and clothes behind. Not good. This smoke is poisonous. We'll leave for now and track them down later. With that, Stick of the Chased led the others and the hand ninjas away from the area. However, some still inhaled the toxic smoke released by Madame Viper and became casualties of the battle. These were overly curious fellows who had run over to check the situation after hearing the explosion. As it turned out, curiosity killed more than just the cat. After this unfortunate incident, the elders of the chase immediately realized their mistake. They then dispatched the hand ninjas to temporarily seal off the area until the toxic smoke had completely dissipated. This further delayed their pursuit of Victor's clone and Madame Viper. By the time they resumed the search, they found that their targets had long since vanished without a trace. They had been able to track the clone and Madame Viper's whereabouts before, partly because of their superior tracking skills, and partly because the two hadn't been hiding their trail. Now, however, the situation was different. With the clone and Madame Viper actively concealing their tracks, it became extremely difficult and time-consuming even for the tracking ninjas of the hand to find their direction. Consider them lucky. By the way, news came from Victor's side. He has found Silver Fox's whereabouts. After receiving news of Silver Fox's whereabouts, the chase immediately stopped tracking the clone and instead rushed to the Yukon River to rendezvous with Victor. They also had a lot of information and intelligence to report to Victor. And from the way Victor found Silver Fox's whereabouts, it was clear that they had indeed encountered an imposter. However, they hadn't noticed any difference between the imposter and the real Victor, except for the hand ninjas, who could tell that the other party wasn't Victor through their special connection with their master. It didn't take them long to travel from within the Federation to Logan's residence in the Yukon River Basin. But it was enough time for Victor and Nina, accompanied by Logan, to get a good look at the unique scenery there. Although the environment here is extremely harsh, even deadly, for ordinary people, for people like Victor, it was like a paradise. Their powerful physiques allowed them to adapt well to the extreme climate, and the unique biosphere and naturally pure water sources provided them with food and necessities to survive. This was also why Logan once intended to settle here permanently with Silver Fox. In fact, if Victor hadn't unexpectedly come here, Logan and Silver Fox might have lived here for many years. However, since Victor's arrival had already disrupted their peaceful lives, they had no choice but to confront the problems that reappeared before them. Silver Fox needed to give an explanation to the hand and the chased, while Logan had to find a way to deal with the clone. Because if Victor could find this place, it meant that the one impersonating him could also. Moreover, Victor also brought a way to deal with the one impersonating him, so Logan was naturally willing to solve this problem once and for all. After all, he actually didn't want anyone to keep coming to trouble and pester him. Most importantly, he didn't want the people around him to be harmed again. From Victor's mouth, he had learned the other party's purpose and methods. The other party hoped to completely turn him into a cold-blooded weapon that only knew how to kill by continuously killing his close relatives. In other words, as long as he was alive, the other party would not give up this goal. And no matter where he hid, the other party would always find a way to locate him and then come knocking at his door to kill. Hiding would never solve the problem, and now Victor had given him a solution. If you can't solve the problem, then solve the person who caused the problem. And Logan was very satisfied with this method. Of course, it would be even better if Silver Fox didn't insist on going with him, because he was really worried that she would be harmed or die again. Fortunately, the Chaste and the Hand ninjas were accompanying them, so Silver Fox's safety could be guaranteed. In fact, with so many people going together, the one to worry about was not Silver Fox's personal safety at all. The one truly needing concern was Clone Victor. If he could still escape like this, then no one else could. When the Chaste arrived, Victor told them about his plans and arrangements. And they were very willing to assist Logan in going to kill the one impersonating Victor. You mean, even you can't tell the difference between me and the imposter from appearance? Yes, not just us. Even the Hand ninjas couldn't tell. It was only because they couldn't feel the restrictions of the contract on him that they confirmed his identity as an imposter. This is very interesting. It seems some of my conjectures should be correct. Did he also inherit my claws and healing ability? Yes, this made it difficult for us to kill him. In the end, he also used this ability to escape from our encirclement. Then how about this? Logan, when you get the Muramasa, have the Chaste and Silver Fox restrain his movements first. Then directly decapitate him with one strike, otherwise, I'm afraid there will be significant unforeseen circumstances. After exchanging intelligence with the arriving members of the Chaste, Victor finally finalized the assassination plan. He also confirmed his conjectures and decided on the itinerary to Europe. You want us to deal with the person impersonating you, so what will you do? Continue traveling. I also want to continue traveling with Nina, but I'm still preparing to resolve this trouble first before traveling. Otherwise, the journey will probably not be peaceful. While you deal with the imposter, I will go to Europe to fundamentally solve this problem. I also have some conjectures about this matter that I need to verify. In fact, while Victor was discussing with Logan and the others here, he had already issued orders through the contract to the Hand ninjas in Europe to investigate the whereabouts of Mr. Sinister and Romulus. At the same time, he also had the ninjas go to Hydra's allies for help. After all, they were the true native, local snakes of that land. Under the dual investigation of the Hand ninjas and Hydra, some clues were indeed found. This also prevented Victor from being completely clueless when he landed in Italy. First, regarding Mr. Sinister, he was, as always, suppressed and persecuted by the Royal Academy of Sciences and the Church for expanding Darwin's theory of evolution. However, he was not arrested but successfully escaped the pursuit of the British police. It is said that the last place he appeared was a port on the Suez Canal. Having obtained this intelligence, combined with his fruitless investigation of Apocalypse in Egypt at the time, Victor could already deduce that Mr. Sinister must have come into contact with Apocalypse during that period. And something must have happened between the two, leading to the birth of the current Mr. Sinister and the complete erasure of traces and legends of Apocalypse's existence. Victor had several conjectures about why Mr. Sinister did this, but none could be confirmed. As for the investigation into Romulus, the harvest was not as much as for Mr. Sinister. It must be said that after his old home was raided last time, Romulus became much more cautious. The only related news investigated was that he once ruled Rome. Therefore, there are still legends about him in present-day Italy. As for other information, there was none at all. In fact, Mr. Sinister's intelligence also did not mention his little Luo. It seems we still have to find these two guys ourselves. I wonder how things are going with Logan. With so many of them, there shouldn't be any problems, right? While Victor investigated Mr. Sinister and Romulus, the two of them sensed someone was digging into their affairs and began taking countermeasures. Because of that, the intelligence that finally reached Victor was extremely limited. At the same time, Mr. Sinister and Romulus grew quite curious about who was probing them. For those who live in the shadows, uncovering the truth isn't hard, especially since Victor had been openly exposing himself and his investigation. He knew that if he couldn't find them, he would have to lure them out. Since they had cloned him, their interest in him had to be strong. Given the right moment, they would make a move. And as long as they had that intention, Victor could create the perfect opportunity. Yet their caution exceeded Victor's expectations. He staged several situations where he was alone, but they never struck. He began to wonder if he had guessed wrong. In truth, Mr. Sinister was eager to act, but Romulus stopped him. Having once suffered a crushing defeat at Victor's hands, Romulus knew how cunning this seemingly reckless man could be. Against an opponent like Victor, no amount of caution was excessive. But Romulus overlooked one fact: Mr. Sinister was his partner, not his subordinate. Romulus, we are partners. Stop telling me what I can or cannot do. Fine. If you insist, I'll leave today, so I won't be dragged down by you. Humph. Our plan is settled, it's time you left. Once I've captured this valuable specimen, I'll contact you. After being repeatedly prevented from acting, Mr. Sinister finally lost his temper. Following an unpleasant clash, Romulus left the base. Mr. Sinister then began preparing to capture Victor, carefully, despite his airy words. Seeing Romulus actually depart, Mr. Sinister upgraded his assessment of Victor yet again. Though stronger than Romulus, Mr. Sinister respected the man's healing factor and primal instincts, traits that made him a troublesome foe. Victor, who shared those gifts, would be no easier prey. What's more, the girl beside Victor gave him a sense of danger second only to Apocalypse. Even now, memories of his former master made him shudder. Had two mutants calling themselves Cyclops and Phoenix not appeared to defeat and seal Apocalypse, he would still be that being's slave. Freed from Apocalypse's control, Mr. Sinister immediately betrayed his master. After Cyclops and Phoenix left, he erased every local legend and faction tied to Apocalypse, ensuring no one could break the seal and revive him. The purge was thorough. Victor and Nina's search for Apocalypse in Egypt yielded nothing. Though liberated, the battle between Apocalypse, Phoenix, and Cyclops had shown him how insignificant his own power was. Hence he continually gathered specimens, cloned himself, and devised a method to transfer his consciousness into new bodies, guaranteeing he could never be killed or trapped. At the same time he collected DNA from powerful mutants, refining and remaking his own body to grow ever stronger. The Wolf Clan's longevity and healing factor had long been coveted by him. Yet the Wolf Clan captives he'd studied fell short of his hopes. From them he deduced that higher-ranking Wolf Clan members must exist, specimens he truly needed. The first such specimen he targeted was Romulus, chieftain of the Wolf Clan, but their clash nearly cost Mr. Sinister his life. That near defeat turned them into allies. Romulus promised vials of other high-ranking Wolf Clan blood as payment. He kept his word, handing over a sample that led to the birth of clone Victor. To Mr. Sinister, however, this clone was a failure. It was an unaltered copy of Victor, with no enhancements, an act of waste in the scientist's eyes. With the healing factor inherited from the original, the clone could endure extensive biomodification and become a supreme living weapon. Instead, Romulus delivered this bare-bones version and stuffed its head with chaotic memories. Mr. Sinister was irritated by such mishandling of their joint product. To him it had been a work of art, Romulus had treated it crudely. Fortunately, he had prepared an entire underground project of Victor clones for his own experiments. He told no one, not even Romulus, of these clones. One day they would make headlines. He also intended to use them to analyze weaknesses in the healing factor, to use against Romulus and other Wolf Clan members later. For Mr. Sinister, there were no eternal friends, only eternal interests. The world should be ruled by him and his clones. Since everything is ready, let the capture begin. At that moment Victor was making one last attempt at baiting his enemy. If they still refused to bite, he would have to find another way to track them. Careful, they're here. Victor didn't need Nina's warning, his beast instincts had already alerted him to the ambush from the shadows. In truth, that ability often rivaled his healing factor. After all, Wolverine had once used it to stop a sprinting Quicksilver. As expected of the specimen I've chosen, you actually dodged my sneak attack. But still the same old Essex, I see. You know me. Impossible. I have no memory of you at all. When Victor evaded the strike, Mr. Sinister coolly praised his performance. But the moment Victor spoke his former name, his expression changed completely. That past identity wasn't some vital secret, yet it should have been impossible to uncover. His current appearance bore no resemblance to the man he'd once been, and he had never spoken of his history. Even if his former wife and friends stood before him, they shouldn't recognize him. And that identity was tied to someone he never wanted to remember. Even if you've recognized me, it hardly matters. You'll soon be my specimen, and I'll have all the time I need to ask how you learned these things. Is that so? Then we'll see if you're capable. All right, Nina, you can stop hiding, he's already noticed you. Actually, I hadn't noticed her, but I don't mind acquiring one more test subject. Though he claimed ignorance, Mr. Sinister had faintly sensed the invisible Nina nearby. He'd picked her up only because of her earlier telepathic warning to Victor. That warning, delivered by telepathy, should have been undetectable to anyone except her and Victor. But to a fellow telepathic mutant, it was as obvious as someone speaking at his side. Thus Mr. Sinister realized Nina existed, otherwise he would never have known another person was hidden nearby. Even after detecting her, he still couldn't pinpoint her location. What he hadn't expected was Victor calling her out. Far from relaxing him, it made him more cautious, because it meant they believed they could beat him without ambush. Are you two underestimating me? But I never underestimate you, Essex. I just see no need for tricks, I prefer open combat to backstabbing. With that, Victor charged. Mr. Sinister had no intention of trading blows, he simply waved and summoned two gene-tailored thugs from the shadows. The hulking creations bore some resemblance to Mr. Hyde. Victor gave a wry smile. Essex really did underestimate him if he thought these two could pose a threat. Victor disposed of them in under 5 minutes. Their huge frames made them clumsy, and their minds were equally dull. He slipped behind them almost effortlessly and removed their heads. With the reality stone restored, Victor had briefly summoned the Muramasa that had once been his. That was the reality stone's power, to make the non-existent real. In this universe, that peculiar Muramasa did not exist. Using the stone this way devoured Victor's life force, but his vitality was immense, and as long as he didn't squander it recklessly, he could bear the cost. Besides, after reality had granted him a unique ability, using the stone no longer consumed his own life. Just as the space stone had given Carol vast energy, and the mind stone had given Quicksilver his speed and Scarlet Witch her reality warping magic, the reality stone granted Victor the absorption and manipulation of cosmic energy he had once possessed. Victor felt the stone was merely using him as a conduit. The cosmic energy he absorbed was converted straight into life force, then siphoned off by the stone. Still, it wasn't without benefit. As noted, it spared him from draining his own vitality when wielding the stone. And not every scrap of converted life force was taken. A portion fused with his body, boosting his healing factor and further enhancing his physique. That was why he dispatched the two brutes so easily, but the matter was far from over. Mr. Sinister had never believed those two could capture Victor. They were merely appetizers. After Victor finished them, a horde of gene-modified soldiers poured in, clearly divided into speed and power types. Some appeared balanced, neither spindly-limbed nor muscle-bound. Yet they were the easiest to crush, too slow and too weak against Victor. While Victor turned into a minion-clearing machine, Nina's duel with Mr. Sinister heated up. Rather than simply crushing foes with telekinesis, she now favored the Sanctum Sanctorum spellsword style. An invisible yet razor-sharp mystical blade cost Mr. Sinister dearly at the first clash. He never saw it coming and, careless, lost an arm to Nina's effortless stroke. Losing an arm undeniably hurt his combat strength. He abandoned close quarters, constantly distancing himself while unleashing shock blasts and telekinetic strikes. After chasing him fruitlessly, Nina settled into a straight contest of telepathy and telekinesis. Neither noticed the minions were almost gone. By the time Mr. Sinister recovered from his exchange with Nina, the experimental fodder under his command had already been completely wiped out by Victor. Alright, the small fry are dealt with. Now it's time for the main course. You are indeed more powerful than I thought. No wonder that fellow Romulus refused to engage you. However, this only makes me more interested in your genes. Save those words until you can make it back alive. Although he knew that given Essex's usual nature, the Mr. Sinister before him was certainly not his original body, the harsh words still had to be said, and the beating still had to be delivered. So Victor pounced after finishing his threat, only to be slammed into the ground by Mr. Sinister's concussive energy wave at an even faster speed. However, his action ultimately drew Mr. Sinister's attention. Taking the opportunity, Nina struck again, successfully dealing a heavy blow to Mr. Sinister. A powerful magic spell hit his body head-on. Burning magical fire engulfed him almost instantly, turning him into ashes. He was taken out just like that. No, he's already escaped. What was destroyed was merely one of his clone bodies. Soul magic. It should be something similar. His soul can constantly travel back and forth among all his clone bodies. Sounds like an unkillable cockroach. In fact, he's just like Dracula. Both are unkillable cockroaches. Despite saying so, Victor never underestimated Dracula or Mr. Sinister. Their actual strength wasn't bad, it was just that their immortality was so prominent that their other abilities were often forgotten and buried. But when someone truly faces them, they realize their strength is actually quite formidable. However, those who feel this way usually never return. Those who do return usually only feel the opponent is like a cockroach that won't die, while their strength is often ignored. Because the ability to return proves their strength has already surpassed Dracula and Mr. Sinister. While things were wrapping up on Victor's side, Logan and the clone Victor were locked in a fierce battle. Of course, the cause of this was Logan's pride and sentimentality. He truly couldn't bring himself to strike Madame Viper, who had once been with him as his wife. Madame Viper, looking at the more powerful lineup across from her, had thought she was doomed this time. She didn't expect that Logan, one of the leaders on the opposite side, would actually be willing to let her go. Although Silver Fox gritted her teeth in hatred, she didn't stop Logan. Because she understood that Logan was just that kind of person, and that was the Logan she loved. However, Madame Viper did not leave, because she didn't want to abandon clone Victor. Of course, she didn't know he was just someone's clone, or perhaps she didn't care. She simply liked his wildness and his strong body, which gave her unprecedented excitement and satisfaction. Similarly, these feelings applied to clone Victor's view of her. He liked this wild and enchanting woman. She could give him things he couldn't find in other women, so in a sense, these two were like-minded, or birds of a feather. Logan had some guesses as to why Madame Viper didn't leave, but he didn't state them openly. He merely issued a one-on-one challenge to clone Victor, promising that if the opponent could defeat him, he would let him go this time. Of course, even if clone Victor lost and died under his blade, they would still let Madame Viper go. After all, their target this time was clone Victor, not Madame Viper. Facing the challenge from Logan, clone Victor accepted with great pleasure. Then, the two clashed, beginning their final contest. Unlike previous contests, Logan did not use his claws this time, but instead used a katana with a red blade. For some reason, clone Victor's wild instincts felt a fatal threat from this katana. Consequently, after the battle began, clone Victor did not adopt his usual style of trading injuries for injuries. This left Logan, who had originally planned to use clone Victor's contempt to kill him with one strike, feeling quite disappointed. However, he didn't pin all his hopes on the possibility that clone Victor would underestimate him. After all, even he, the wielder, could sense the danger of this blade through his beast instincts, let alone clone Victor, the one being attacked. Rather than clone Victor being killed by a single strike due to carelessness, Logan preferred a hearty and fierce battle before the two of them settled everything from the past. Of course, after dealing with the clone, Logan also planned to go find trouble with Romulus and the Wolf Clan. As long as he confirmed this blade could kill clone Victor, then it could naturally kill Romulus as well. In truth, Logan didn't hate clone Victor that much, as he was merely a pitiful pawn who didn't even have his own identity. But the things he had done were unforgivable, so he had to settle it with a life-or-death struggle. Unlike previous battles, Logan held the upper hand this time. As the saying goes, an inch longer is an inch stronger, especially when that length is exceptionally lethal. The gap becomes evident. The only way for Victor to win was to find a way to seize this dangerous weapon. To achieve this, he had to get within a certain range of Logan. But Logan clearly wouldn't give him that chance. As a result of his hard practice, proficiency with the katana was one of Logan's training gains. Precisely because of this, clone Victor's several attempts at a close-range surprise attack to seize the blade ended in failure. In one dangerous moment, a significant gash was even carved into his face by the Muramasa. Moreover, this gash did not heal instantly under the effect of his healing factor like wounds from other weapons. It was the appearance of this wound that made clone Victor understand the source of his sense of crisis. Wounds caused by this blade would not heal at all because of the healing factor. Therefore, if a vital point were struck by the opponent, it would likely result in a truly fatal injury. But, only like this is it interesting, isn't it? Even though he was at a disadvantage and constantly facing a lethal threat, clone Victor showed no fear or cowardice. Instead, he grew increasingly excited and frenzied. The saber-tooth wildness hidden in his genes was completely unleashed. He no longer obsessed over seizing the weapon in Logan's hand, but instead used his claws and limbs to counterattack while dodging Logan's strikes. He understood now that he didn't need to forcibly snatch that katana. As long as he defeated Logan or seized an opportunity during the fight, he could still take the katana and turn the tide. Once clone Victor broke free from his initial tactical error, Logan's pressure increased significantly. Although their healing factors allowed them to ignore most damage, it didn't mean they wouldn't dodge. In fact, they usually dodged most attacks. They only tanked damage when an attack was unavoidable or when they needed to use their ability to put psychological pressure on the enemy. With the help of his beast instincts, Clone Victor's dodging skills were actually quite excellent. When he stopped obsessing over dodging the blade, it became very difficult for Logan to land a hit. Even so, Logan still held the upper hand in the battle. The Muramasa he brandished whistled through the air, repeatedly grazing past Clone Victor's body. Under Logan's aggressive assault, Clone Victor's beast instincts constantly stimulated all his senses, allowing him to perceive the direction of Logan's attacks and perform evasive maneuvers. But Logan, who also possessed beast instincts, would adjust his attacks based on Clone Victor's movements, aiming to successfully strike or even heavily wound his opponent. This battle was a multi-layered test of skill, ability, and even luck. Almost every exchange was fraught with peril. However, for the two men in the thick of it, they had no way to focus on that. The only thing they could do and focus on was finding the other's opening and then finding a way to deliver a killing blow. It was only because the weapon capable of delivering that killing blow was currently in Logan's hands that he was able to maintain the advantage. If this continues, I'll definitely fall here. It seems I have to take a risk, otherwise, if this stalemate persists, some variable will surely occur. I must end this quickly, or if a variable occurs, he might escape again. Almost at the same time, both men thought of ending the fight quickly. Thus, they simultaneously launched an all-out assault, and it was precisely because of this clash that the battle finally drew to a close. Victor, who was a step faster in his attack, swung his claws high and struck Logan directly in the chest. While tearing the skin of his chest, he also ripped away a chunk of flesh. In truth, Logan's injuries were more than that. His ribs had also been broken by that strike. But he didn't retreat a single step. Instead, he roared and swung the Muramasa in his hand toward Clone Victor's neck. As a dark red blade light flashed across Clone Victor's neck, his body, which was still moving forward, continued to charge straight ahead. But his head went tumbling into the sky before landing on the ground nearby. The powerful vitality granted by the healing factor meant he didn't die immediately, but that didn't lessen his pain. He had to accept the fact of his defeat and ultimately died in agony and resentment. In a sense, he had actually avoided his greatest pain, the fact that he was merely a clone and not the real Victor. Until his death, he believed he was the true Sabretooth Victor, and not a clone product manufactured by Mr. Sinister. At the exact moment of his complete death, the reality stone within Victor's body suddenly underwent a change. The shining deep red light of the ether particle emanated from Victor's body, finally condensing into a solid whole. Looking at the materialized reality stone, just as Victor was about to grab it, a golden sorcerer portal suddenly opened in the void. Stepping out of the door was Nina's current magic teacher, the leader of the Sanctum Sanctorum, and one of Earth's most powerful protectors, the Sorcerer Supreme, Ancient One. It seems the time has come. What time has come? Are you hiding something from us? Teacher, what exactly happened? What are you talking about? Nina and Victor both appeared somewhat surprised by the sudden appearance of Sorcerer Ancient One. Furthermore, the words coming from her mouth put Victor on guard. As the holder of the reality stone, you should know that the price to pay for permanently modifying reality is immense. Especially when the scope and content of the modification are larger, the price becomes more terrifying. That is indeed the case, so what you mean is, to use the reality stone, there is actually another way, which is to have an extremely profound understanding of time. When the time stone and the reality stone are used simultaneously, reality can be modified to a certain extent without paying a price. So, teacher, your purpose in coming to us is to modify some reality. Yes. Didn't I ask you to play the role of this world's Victor before? However, you seem to find it difficult to do so, because there are indeed some fundamental differences between you and him. When Sorcerer Ancient One suddenly brought up the matter of role-playing again, Victor instantly felt a bit uneasy. Because he was indeed walking a path completely different from the one he had seen. I indeed cannot become that kind of person, so do you want to turn me into that? If that's the case, then there's nothing for it but to fight. You don't need to become anyone, you are yourself. The saber-tooth of this universe appeared long ago, and he has already fulfilled his destiny. Wait, this point in time. Could you be talking about? Exactly. Now I need you to cooperate with me, using the reality stone along with my time stone to complete this piece of true history. Victor, having understood Sorcerer Ancient One's methods and intentions, naturally had no reason to refuse. With the appearance of red and green light, an invisible wave instantly rippled out, quickly affecting the entire Earth. Due to the lack of help from the Space Stone, it would still take some time for this wave to spread to the entire universe. But from the moment it covered Earth, this piece of true history had been completed. The memories of Logan, the members of the Hand, and Silver Fox were all modified. The clone that was killed was the real Victor, and his actions had brought him his just deserts. After dealing with Victor, Logan prepared to settle scores with Romulus. Silver Fox chose to accompany him, while the ninjas of the Hand and the members of the Chaste prepared to return and report to the Hand's mysterious master. Such changes were taking place all over the world. Everything related to Victor underwent corresponding changes and modifications. Some things even became as if they had never happened, or Victor had never participated. All of this was seen clearly by Victor and Nina through Sorcerer Ancient One's Cauldron of the Cosmos. The destiny of the sabretooth Victor in this universe had ended. Victor was now free. Now he could do whatever he wanted, though he couldn't reveal his true identity. Because sabretooth Victor no longer existed, unless he wanted to bring him back to life again and bear the corresponding destiny. Well, since I can do as I please now. Nina, let's continue our journey first. Okay. Decades later, in a certain country in Africa. I finally found it, the most important and rarest component of the legendary adamantium vibranium. Damn you, Logan, I'll make you pay. Ha ha ha. In an underground laboratory somewhere in Europe. These clones, as well as the facilities and methods, are all from my hand, but why don't I have the slightest impression of them?